You can, you're skinny, you can do some Krispy Kreme.
You're unmuted now.
Okay?
It looks like you have the setup that you want already, right? Or do you want to be able to see?
You know, I think I want to see the people. I've got that agenda in front of me.
Right, here you go. So this has,
That's perfect.
this
That's
is
good
good.
right there. Yeah,
See
that's
the
good. And Chris,
participant.
I know Chris shifts it a little bit when he goes on. That's perfect.
Okay.
And, he told me that Miss Harrison wouldn't be here and that, everybody else is here. Is Dr. Irons in and everything?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think he might be coming a little late, so.
Okay.
All right, so
But
you,
we got, we have a quorum now.
yes,
So you let me know when you get seated if you're ready to start.
okay.
All right, thank you too for everything. Guess we'll get started in just a minute.
Chloe, do we have it set up to be recorded?
Yes, recording's on, streaming live to YouTube, and Charlie, I'm seated, ready.
You
if
tell me
wanna go ahead
whenever
and
you're
start.
ready, and, you tell me when you're ready and we have a quorum, we'll get started.
I believe we have a quorum.
We do? Okay, are y'all ready to get going, staff? You good?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to this August 19th meeting of the City of Charleston Planning Commission meeting. My name is Charlie Carish, and I'm the chairman of the commission. So everyone knows the commission members are appointed by Charleston City Council. They're volunteers, and I know you join me in appreciating their work and their time. A little bit about the way we handle our agenda is Mr. Morgan will read an item, or I'll read an item into the meeting. Then staff will give their recommendation. We'll discuss the item and give us a recommendation. Then we'll hear from the applicant, and then we'll hear from anyone associated with the application, whether they're opposed or in favor of the application. If anyone is opposed, we'll hear back from the applicant to respond to those concerns. And then we will close the public aspect of the meeting and move on. I'd like to announce the members of the commission just for the record. Mr. Jimmy Bailey, Ms. Erica Harrison. I don't think Ms. Harrison will be here tonight, correct?
Correct. She is not here.
Okay. Dr. Eddie Irons, Ms. Donna Jacobs, Ms. Angie Johnson, Ms. Sunday Lemphasis, Mr. Harry Lassane, and Mr. Sean Flug. Chris, do you want to give us any more introduction or any more direction of how anything I missed in the way the meetings would go?
Sure. And just real quickly, Mr. Lassane is coming in from out of town and should be on in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
And from the city planning department standpoint, I am here. I'm the planning manager for the city. We may have Lee Batchelder attending. He's our zoning administrator. We have Philip Overcash helping out. He's our senior planner. He's also helping with technical issues if people have them. Anna Harp is our senior zoning planner, and she's attending. Chloe Stuber is handling all the whole broadcast from her desk, and then Marcy Grant is our clerk. And we can move on from this page. So virtual meeting protocol, we display this at every meeting. It talks about how people have to register to be able to be speaking tonight. And we've asked that everybody give their name whenever they start speaking so that we know who it is who's speaking. Chat and Q&A functions have been disabled for everyone. The commission members should be both seen on video and heard when speaking. We'll be polling for the voting, yes, and public comment period. These are all part of a public meeting format. Everybody has to have signed up today by 12 p.m. So we've got the whole list of people who want to speak. We also have written comments that we'll be reading today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if you all are ready, we can go on to the first item.
Well, and just to clarify, it looks like there's only one deferred item under zoning number 3, correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and number 1 under rezonings is 2421 Ashley River Road, Pierpont, West Ashley, TMS number 35516000. I think I got enough zeros. 25 026 027. 8.04 acres, requested zoning from general business, GB, to diverse residential, DR1F. Mr. Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the commission. So this is a site that's been in the city for a while along Ashley River Road. It was, I think, the Atlantic Presbytery office was on this site. I believe if you can see my cursor, it's right in this location. Is my voice loud enough for everybody? I know last night at City Council, I had to speak up a little bit. Are you all hearing me clearly? Okay. All right. So this is an 8-acre site. It's currently zoned general business. It's mostly not developed at present. It's been purchased by Homes of Hope, which is interested in doing affordable townhouses in this location. And part of the reason for the rezoning is that our fire codes are based on the zoning district as opposed to the use. And so even though they're building townhouses, they would have to build the townhouses on a general business zone property to a much higher standard that is, you know, much more expensive for the construction as opposed to normal townhouses. And so that is why they're interested in getting the zoning to diverse residential. It would also reduce the actual density on the site from 26.4 in general business to 19.4 in diverse residential DR1F. It's also compatible with the DR1F that is a piece of the adjoining property. Nearby uses include a retail center across the street at Dogwood. There is a traffic signal here at Dogwood and 61. There's a gas station here. There are other commercial uses, including storage. There's a new retail and event space going in the area further to the north. So we're seeing some more development along Ashley River Road here. There is single-family residential to the rear, and then diverse residential across Dogwood over here, and other residential in this location. So it's a real mix of uses out here, but it is a location that from a staff standpoint, we felt very comfortable with for the townhouses. I'll kind of go through some of the slides we have. So here it is in the Century 5 plan. It shows in the highway designation. So that means the densities requested are appropriate for that location. Here's an aerial image. Again, you see the current office that's on the site that I believe would be demolished. The rest of the site is vegetated. And then you see some of the surrounding uses, the gas station or the small strip center across the way. Here is a little bit closer view of the site in question. And then here is a oblique image of the property. Again, Ashley River Road is here running roughly north-south in this location. And here's the property from Ashley River Road. And our recommendation is for approval. So now we go into the public comment period.
And Chloe, is the applicant want to be heard? Stephen Whiteside Associates, is there a representative there that wants to be heard?
Yes, Patterson and Jeffrey here. I don't know which of you wants to speak first. You both should have capability to share your video and unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Chloe. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Hey, everybody. Patterson Farmer with Stephen Whiteside and Associates. And with me tonight, I have Jeff Randolph as well with the Randolph Group. And Christopher, thank you for your time. I think you pretty well addressed and great. You have a great synopsis there. The only thing we would like to add, just to clarify this, the overall project does ultimately include the parcel kind of to the southeast that is currently zoned DR1F and fronts Dogwood Avenue. That's ultimately where the sole access, ingress, egress for this property will come from, knowing that, Ashley River Road does have, is congested, so looking to keep our traffic, keep everybody safe, and, limit those access points. With that, Jeff, if you're on, I'll turn it over to you if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Patterson and members of the commission. I am a development manager for Homes of Hope, which is a nonprofit out of Greenville. who has provided over 640 affordable housing units across South Carolina, including Charleston, Columbia, Rock Hill, and the upstate. Homes of Hope exists to rebuild lives through housing, economic, and workforce development, including developing market quality, affordable, and energy efficient housing for low to moderate income households. We're looking forward to this development, and it is in conjunction with the City of Charleston Community Development Division. They're assisting us and as a funding partner. So available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, sir. Chloe, is there anyone that wants to speak in favor or concerned about the application?
And Mr. Chairman, Gianna Johnson from our Housing Community Development is on the call on the meeting.
Okay.
Would be happy to speak on this issue.
That'd be wonderful. We'd love to hear.
I want to first thank the Planning Commission members for your leadership. You do great work for us that often goes into long hours, so those things are not unnoticed. And certainly Christopher, Jacob, and their team, they have been doing amazing work on behalf of affordable and workforce housing in the city of Charleston. So many thanks to all of those involved. As it relates to this property, I come in support of it and advocating for it. The City of Charleston's Redevelopment Corporation invested, with the approval of City Council, $1.3 million in the acquisition of this site. More importantly, once these townhomes are built or constructed, they will remain affordable for perpetuity. The actual structures will be sold to first-time home buyers. The dirt will go into the Palmetto Community Land Trust, which is a program of the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation, which enables these units to remain, these homes, to remain affordable for perpetuity. That is something we support in our community. We have not had enough of that, so this is an opportunity that we have not seen very often, but are quite excited that is coming forth through this development. So we certainly ask for your support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And I want to say thank you for your work. It's very important what you do. And it's a challenge in these times, and it was before this, but so thank you for your work as well. Chloe, is there anyone that would like to be heard on this item?
No, no one has signed up to speak and no comments were submitted.
Okay, great. So I'm assuming that we'll close this public aspect out. And again, I'd like to thank Ms. Johnson for her work. And this sounds like a wonderful, worthwhile project, but I'd like to ask any commission members if they have comments, questions, or a motion.
I'll move for approval.
Okay. Ms. Jacobs moves for approval. Is there a second or other comments on this item?
I'll second it. Sunday.
Ms. Lampus has seconded. So a motion by Ms. Jacobs, a second by Ms. Lampus. Any other comments? If not, we'll call a roll call vote. Mr. Bailey?
Sorry about that. Aye, in favor.
Great, thank you. Is Dr. Irons with us yet? Do you know? Maybe not. No? Ms. Jacobs, obviously, I'm assuming you're in favor. Can you, for the record, let us know?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Johnson?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Lampus?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Flug?
Aye, in favor.
And I'm assuming Mr. Lassane is not with us yet, and I'm in favor as well. So that would be 6 in favor and none against. Thank you all. Item number 2 is 1814 Harmon Street, 4 Mile, Hibernian, TMS 46402-00052, approximately 2.1 acres. Request rezoning from general business GB to light industrial. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you. And this is a property that is well up into the neck area of Charleston. This is Meeting Street Road running roughly north-south in this area, almost to the 4 Mile community up here to the north. Herbert Street is here. Milford Street is to the south. Of course, this is Milford, not where the city's operations facilities are. Those are to the west of I-26 and King Street and all that. But this is surrounded on two sides by heavy industrial. It has light industrial to the south, and then general business is over towards the Meeting Street side. So it was a bit of a anomaly that it was still general business in this area. Our plans in this area have always talked about this being more of a industrial or heavy industrial area. I believe we have the image here from the Century 5 plan. It does show it as industrial, so the request is right in line with that. We have an aerial image. It's an already developed property with buildings that look like they're kind of industrial type buildings on it already. You can see it up close and the type of storage and activities that are going on there. And here we have it up closer with the oblique image, and then a street level view and another street level view. So our recommendation is for approval based on the plan and the character of the surrounding area, and recommend it to you that way.
Great, thank you, Mr. Morgan. Chloe, is Mr. Varner with us, the applicant, or anyone else to speak on this application?
Yes, he is. Mr. Varner, you should be able to unmute yourself and share your video.
Great. This is Trad Varner. Thank you.
Did you get muted? We lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Apologize. Yeah, I think Christopher did a pretty good job. I'm here for obviously any questions that y'all might have. We are ushering this through on behalf of the owner of the property, who's operated a tire retreading facility on this site since the mid 80s. And it wasn't until we got involved that we realized that at some point during that time, it had been rezoned to 2GB. So their plans now, they have sold the business and are looking to put some tenants in these buildings that are on the site. And Christopher was correct. Those are both sort of metal warehouse buildings. So our likely tenant will be a light industrial user. So don't know who that'll be yet, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Varner. Chloe, has anyone signed up before in favor and in opposition?
No.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. This is a interesting area. It's everything's building out that way, and we'll hear some other night item on our agenda, obviously, on that area, but it's a hub area. So, is any commission members like to be heard? Questions, motions?
I'll move for approval.
Ms. Lapis moves for. I'm sorry.
No, I was just telling you my name.
Okay, thank you, son. Thank you, Ms. Lapis. And Ms. Lapis moves for approval. Is there a second to the motion? Other questions? Comments?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll go to a roll call vote. Mr. Bailey?
Aye, in favor.
I'm going to call Dr. Irons' name just in case he joins us. Dr. Irons? Ms. Jacobs?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Johnson?
I in favor.
Ms. Lampasas?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Flug?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Lassane? Obviously not with us, and I'm in favor, so that would be 6 in favor and none opposed. Thank you. Number 3 is item on our agenda is rezoning is 2 Ray Street, West Side Peninsula, TMS 4600401103, 0.46 acres, requested zoning from GB to mixed-use workforce housing, MU1 WH, and from Old City Height District 2.5 to Old City Height District 3. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is almost a half-acre site that is owned by the Charleston Local Development Corporation that seeks to improve the local community with lending and other facilities. They are requesting a rezoning from general business to MUWH or MU1 WH which would allow for workforce housing, and also from the Old City Height District 2.5 to the Old City Height District 3. So the objective here is to have affordable housing as well as ground floor mixed uses that could include office and retail spaces. The surrounding area, this is Upper King Street. It's at the very corner of Race Street, but it's addressed from Race Street instead of King. There is affordable housing immediately to the north. I believe it's called the King's Crossing affordable housing. There is a group of restaurants and other retail businesses across the way here in King. I believe there is a restaurant across Race Street from the property as well, and other parking areas associated with these restaurants and other retail uses. We'll go through some other images of the property. It is in our Century 5 plan as an urban location. However, the overall character of King Street is such that with the affordable housing to the north and the availability of public transportation and the close proximity of employment sources, that we are comfortable with the MU designation for the site. Here you see an aerial view of it. It was a building probably built sometime in the 1970s as a doctor's office. You see a little bit closer here, it has a fairly large parking lot associated with it at present. Here is a oblique image, and you see the affordable housing that is to the north and to the west here, and then the commercial uses that are to the south, to the east and to the south. And then we have a street level view of the building, again, very kind of 1970s looking low slung structure. Here we have a view from the parking lot, and you actually see the LDC's name on the parking area designation. So our recommendation is for approval, and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morgan. And just for the record, our Vice Chairman is with us, Mr. Lassane. Mr. Lassane, good to have you. Chloe is the applicant with us, or the Charleston Local Development Corporation representative.
Yes, Mr. Saltzman is here.
Okay, great. We'll hear from him.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for considering this rezoning request. For us, we think this is an opportunity to take a low-rise site and explore opportunities for redevelopment. If we are granted the height and rezoning request, we can develop permanent affordable senior housing potentially, as well as possibly some commercial uses that, but for this request, would not be served. We think it's an example of what other people with underutilized low-rise facilities could do for broad community development purposes. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Mr. Saltzman. Chloe, is anyone signed up to be heard on this item before or against, or concerns?
Yes, Ms. Shaw Johnson would like to speak on this item as well.
Great, love to hear from you.
Thank you, sir. Want to support this rezoning. Steve has indicated the construction of senior housing, but certainly overall, this presents an opportunity for housing, but also to expand opportunities for small business in this facility. On the peninsula in particular of the city of Charleston, for small businesses, the cost to rent office space is very expensive. So we view this as an awesome mixed-use opportunity that would not only provide the affordable and workforce housing for seniors, but would also provide business opportunities for small businesses who want to be on the peninsula and would benefit from what the LDC offers in their shop. So we wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Chloe, is anyone else signed up to speak?
No, no one has signed up or submitted any comments.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Johnson, again, and Mr. Saltzman. We'll close the public aspect of this, and I'd ask for any questions, comments, or motions from commission members. I think it's a wonderful project. I hadn't heard from anyone, but I'm gonna go ahead and move for approval on this item number 3, 2 Ray Street.
Looks like you've got a couple of commission members with questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Ms. Limpis looked like she was raising her hand, and I know Harry did.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry. I was just
Okay.
moving my screen.
Okay. And then Mr. Lassane.
Mr. Lassane?
You're muted. Harry, you're muted. There we go.
All right, thank you. Sorry, technology problems. I thank you, Charlie, and thanks to the LDC and the city for bringing this forward. I think this is a really creative use of this site, suburban style building on in an urban site. It's perfect redevelopment opportunity, and I want to support this, and I will second the chairman's motion for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Lassane. As any other commission members, Chloe or Chris, want to be heard on this? I can't see them all sometimes. No?
Not that I can see.
Okay, great. So we have, I made a motion to approve, Mr. Lassane seconds. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Bailey?
Aye, in favor.
I'm gonna call Dr. Irons' name just in case he's joined us. Dr. Irons? Ms. Jacobs?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Johnson?
I in favor.
Ms. Lampasas?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Lassane?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Flug?
Aye, in favor.
And I'm in favor as well, so that would be 7 in favor, none against. Thank you all, and thank you for the Charleston Local Development Corporation for getting that site. Let me ask you, Chloe, Christopher, since item number 4 is going to probably be a little bit lengthy, can we knock the rezonings out with that? I don't know if anybody's waiting to speak on any of them, but can we knock those out? I know number 3 is deferred, so there's just 3 rezoning items. Would that be appropriate?
We could. Do we have anybody, Chloe, who signed up to speak for those?
No, we don't. Also, just wanted to make sure Chair knew that Miss Jacobs is raising her hand to speak.
I was going to make
Okay.
the same suggestion, Charlie. I was getting ready to lower my hand because I was in favor of us
Okay.
just getting rid of those.
Yeah, if we can do that, it sounds like, unless there's any objection from any commission members, let's go and knock out the zoning so we can just deal with the last rezoning item number 4. Mr. Morgan?
I'm going to scroll through. It's going to take me a minute here. Let's see.
That's all right.
There we are. Okay, so zoning number 1. We are at 2444 Quail Hollow Court in Pierpont, West Ashley. This is a request of diverse residential, DR1. It was zoned Office General in Charleston County. And we are recommending approval of the DR1 as other parcels in this small little subdivision or zone DR1 in the city.
Great. And Chloe, I think you said no one's signed up to speak, so I'm assuming the owner doesn't need to speak as well. That
Correct.
being said, I'll ask if there's any questions, comments, or motion by commission members on zonings number 1. Is there a motion?
I'll move for approval.
I'll second it.
Okay, Mr. Lassane, I think move for approval. Ms. Jacobs second. I think I got that correct. If there's no other comments, we'll do. Good. I'm sorry.
Eric Schultz, our city staff, is raising his hand. Might bring him.
We
into
always
the
want to hear from
meeting.
Eric. So, yeah, if Eric wants to say something, we always want to hear from him.
Okay, I'm having some technical glitches here. Okay. Hold on 1 second here.
Okay.
It's not responding to my prompts. Eric, I think that it's happening on your end. So I am trying to promote you to panelists and allow you to talk, but you have to accept the invitation. Okay. You should be in the meeting now.
Okay. Eric, we're ready whenever you are. Chloe, we're moving along.
Sorry, guys. I was just exiting my truck. I did not mean.
Well, we jumped ahead a little bit, so you probably
Did you hear me?
didn't come out this early. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you have something to say, Eric?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was just exiting my truck. I'm just a staffer listening to the thing, and I must have hit something getting out of my truck. I do not need to speak at all tonight. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
It's good to hear from you anyway. So that being said, it doesn't sound like there's anyone here to speak on this. I think there was a motion in a second. I'm confused myself a little bit now, but yeah, I believe there was a motion in a second. Can we clarify who made that motion? I think it was Mr. Lassane. Did you make the motion to approve?
It was Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Bailey, I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey. And Ms. Jacobs seconded, I believe. So we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Bailey?
Aye, in favor.
Dr. Irons? Ms. Jacobs?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Johnson?
I in favor.
Ms. Lampasas?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Lassane?
Aye, in favor.
Great. Mr. Flug?
Aye, in favor.
And I'm in favor as well, so it looks like that as well as 7 in favor, none against. Chris, of 2 and 4, can we need to take those separately?
We could take those together. They are very similar.
So I'll read them. I'll read them into the record. Number 2 is 2229 Wupalo, Ashley Hall Plantation, TMS 3531200017. Request zoning of single-family residential, SR1. It was R4 in the county. And item number 4 is 1551 Pine Bark Lane, North Pine Bark, West Ashley, TMS 3531500037. 0.22 acres. Request zoning of SR1. Again, was R4 in the county. Mr. Morgan?
Yes, and basically they're pretty self-explanatory. They had R4 zoning in the county, their SR1 recommendations, and that is compatible with other properties that have been annexed in the city in those neighborhoods.
Thank you. And I think, Chloe, you said no one was signed up to speak, so we'll close the public aspect and ask for motion, questions, or comments by commission members.
I'll move for approval.
Is that Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
I'll second
Great,
it.
thank you, Mr. And that's on, just to clarify, that's on item number 2 and item number 4, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Bailey?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Jacobs?
Aye, in favor.
Ms. Johnson?
I in favor.
Ms. Lampasas?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Lassane?
Aye, in favor.
Mr. Flug?
Aye, in favor.
And I'm in favor as well, so that would be 7 in favor and none opposed. Just to clarify, item number 3 on the zonings was deferred. That was 772 Yopon Canehoy. That was deferred. So now we'll go back to the rezonings. And rezoning number 4 is Morrison Drive, Romney Street, in North Romney, Laurel Island Peninsula, TMS 464000006, comma 002, 023, 038, 459, 02, 00013, and 4611, 303, 024, 196.1 acres. Request rezoning from general business, heavy industrial, Upper Peninsula, and diverse residential to PUD, Plan Unit Development, Laurel Island. Mr. Morgan?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so this item was presented to you all last month in just a kind of workshop format or just for information only. And the applicants are back this month for a recommendation for approval request for this PUD. This is property that is, for the majority of it, is heavy industrial zoning. And of course, that allows already with heavy industrial, a very large amount of entitlements, 19.4 units an acre for residential. Of course, any residential that would be built there would have to be built to a fire code that would be compatible with heavy industrial. So that is a little bit of a problematic issue, but there are large entitlements via the heavy industrial designation. It is also in the waterfront or W height district, which allows for very tall buildings, much taller buildings that are proposed in the PUD, but they are buildings that have to be set back a good bit and don't create opportunities for good urban streetscapes like we have in downtown Charleston. And so those are some of the reasons that the PUD is needed to allow for proper redevelopment on the site that is compatible with development and densities of downtown Charleston. I think everybody's pretty familiar with where the property is on Morrison Drive, on the east of Morrison Drive, excuse me. Romney Street is in this location, running roughly east and west. The old Charleston County Recycle Center that is still functioning is in this location here. There's a major rail line that is coming in from the north to the port area that crosses in through this area here. Charleston County has their Development Disabilities Board and Magistrates Court on the property across Morrison Drive that's own general business. Then you have, of course, the island itself, which is a former landfill. Some of the history on this, of course, and this was discussed at the last meeting, but I'll go through that also, is that, for nearly 15 years, I believe, this has been a property that has had different development plans discussed for it. There have been public engagements during that time for different development plans. It started with a small par 3 golf course and golf resort on the property. Progressed to concepts that looked at potential industrial uses. And then the North American properties had a very extensive public charrette, I guess about 5 or so years ago, that envisioned the Lorelei development that was going to be a mixed-use development that would have incorporated the bridge that is discussed in this PUD. They ended up, despite having lots of public engagement, they learned that there was not the appetite for as wide a bridge in the Cool Blow area as they were interested in, and so they did not move forward with their plans. And that brings us to today with the concepts that are coming before you, which we feel from a staff standpoint have really been molded with a number of years of public input and different eyes on them. And we think we've got the best proposal we've seen for this location and are very much in favor of it. We're going to go through some of the images here from the plans. Of course, at the time the plan was written in 2010, it was shown as industrial and urban core because it was industrially zoned. And that allows for very intense development on the property. It includes residential development, which could be allowed, but also intensive industrial development, which would have potentially brought heavy trucking, employment centers, things like that. Here you see the overall aerial image of the property, and you see the parcels that are along Morrison Drive that are part of it, the County Development Disabilities Board here, and then the recycling center and other vacant property that's across from the new Boundary Point apartments. And then we have an image of the county property and the county recycling facility. Again, you see some of the new development, the 5-story Boundary Point development that is now complete. So we are recommending approval of this PUD, And we can go through all the details of the PUD, but I wanted to go ahead and bring forward what we are looking at as potential conditions here. This is with staff discussion over the last few weeks and taking a look at what the developer has in the whole package for the PUD. Obviously, they have bumped the affordable housing in the development up to a 20% level, which is very, very good, and we're very much in favor of that. In that affordable housing, though, they are committing to 10% of the units being permanently affordable and 10% of the units being affordable for 10 years. So we would like to suggest to the Planning Commission a condition in line with this, and I'll kind of read this off and as well as you seeing this in front of you. And it basically saying is that 20% of all housing will be workforce housing. So it's very clear that 20% is workforce housing. 10% being permanently affordable, 10% being affordable for 10 years. And then we would like to suggest with this condition, upon permitting for 1,278 units, that's about 30% of the development entitlement discussed in the PUD, I'm losing my words here on my screen here. I'm trying to move this around so I can see this. The PUD would have achieved 20% of those units as affordable units. So essentially with the 1,278 residential units, 20% of that 1,278 figure would be affordable. This is making sure that we're getting affordable all through the process of the development. And then upon permitting for 2,556 units, which would be essentially 60% of the approved development level, the PUD would have achieved 20% of those units as affordable units. So again, getting that 20% as this project progresses. Another thing that we're interested in seeing come forward as the project progresses is with the retail square footage and the office square footage, we'd like to request that a 50% threshold of residential units permitted, that 10% of the retail square footage and 10% of the office square footage having been constructed, assuming that road connections have been completed, allowing this level of square footage. Then there has been a good bit of discussion in community meetings about the open space, and we would like to make sure that the development commits to 39.2 acres of usable, publicly accessible open space. The only change to this amount of open space would be acts of God, such as if a large storm made some of the island erode away, or an earthquake, or federal or state regulatory changes. And then finally, we'd like to suggest a condition that there be no gates on any of the streets in the development. With those conditions, staff is comfortable with what has been proposed. The development team is going to go through an overall presentation here. I should add that since your last meeting, the development team has been meeting with neighborhoods in the affected area, and they can give you a report as to how those meetings have gone. But with these conditions, we are comfortable with the state that the PUD is in today. And we will move on to the applicant provided slides.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And who are we going to hear from? We have several people listed here. Boy, why don't you take us through it, Chris, who we're going to hear from first?
Is it Mr. Bello or Mr. Hellman first here?
It's going to be Mr. Hellman, then Mr. Bello.
Okay.
Good. Am I? Perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Morgan, and thank you, members of the commission. We also appreciate you having the meeting in July where we could make this initial presentation. Tonight here with me, Brian Hellman, 105 Broad Street, Hellman, Yates, and Tisdale. Tonight here with me, I have Robert Clement with Clement Development. I have Eddie Bello with Bello Garris Architects. And I have Jenny Cavucci and Rhett Reinhardt with Revere Group. As an introductory matter, I think there have been a lot of questions about why a PUD. And I think, as Mr. Morgan pointed out, the PUD here is really the right way to go. We're starting with pretty intensive zoning, as you see, heavy industrial. We're pretty much allowed just about every use in the city of Charleston. We're at the far right of the use table. We've got this W height district that allows, it's a strange height district because for every 6 inches to a foot, you move away from a property line, a building height can go up by a foot. So it doesn't lend itself to necessarily urban streetscapes, but certainly some pretty tall buildings can be built there. And with the zoning that we have, we really don't have any requirements as it relates to things like workforce housing. In fact, in heavy industrial, workforce housing is expressly not allowed in any shape, manner, or form, but other uses are. Additionally, there's no requirement for green space, and through years and years of public outreach, what we've heard through charrettes, through planning staff, through city council meetings, county council meetings, mayors, the citizens of this community, we've heard that there are a lot of things that are important for Laurel Island, and we've felt and we've worked pretty hard at getting this PUD together, listening to what the commission had to say in July, listening to what our public outreach had to say, and we've got what we believe is a great PUD that really creates a number of great uses. Eddie Bello is here, and he's going to walk us through those again, and then I'll be here to follow up with any questions you might have specifically about the text. So with that, I'm going to let Eddie start his presentation.
Okay, am I on? Hi, everybody. Christopher, if you could go to the first slide. Okay, so again, I'm Eddie Bello with Bello Garris, and I'm going to just run through the plan. It hasn't changed a lot since the last that you saw back in July. We've mostly had very favorable comments, so we've developed it a little bit further. We've made some changes to the PUD language. That's been the main change. But I just want to walk the plan through you. So next slide, Christopher. One of the key elements of the master plan are the Laurel Island guiding principles. These will guide development throughout the future of the island, and there are 5 there. I went through these last time. Connection to the environment is very key. That's something we heard often in our public outreach. Certainly, it's an island, so that makes a lot of sense. So the plan itself should have strong connection to the water, views to the water, and a lot of public parks. Another principle was sustainable and resilient practices. You might recall last time we talked a lot about the difficulty of building and developing on a former landfill. So certainly our infrastructure and our utilities will be very resilient to long-term climate change or natural disasters, things we have to deal with all the time. Certainly much more sustainable and resilient than the majority of those elements elsewhere on the peninsula. And this plan is to promote alternate forms of transportation like cycling, pedestrian, and public transportation. And then the buildings themselves should have sustainable components to them. Social and economic diversity is important. We've talked a lot about workforce housing. We'll talk more about it tonight. That's a key component, and it's always been. We've bolstered that. Christopher touched on that already, and we'll talk about that at the end. And also, some of the earlier plans of this island were much less diverse than what we're looking for. We want this to be a mix of uses, commercial, retail, multifamily, entertainment. And so the idea is through the implementation of workforce housing and the mix of uses, we hope to have a very diverse community, just like the rest of the city, a mix of income, races, and age. Quality of public realm is important. We have a fantastic public realm in Charleston, and so this plan is designed around activating the public realm. The buildings will have to activate the public realm. We'll have a lot of access to public parks. And then the last one is authenticity. You might remember last time there are a couple of historic resources on site, the Robert Mills ruins, the old powder magazines, and then the Standard Oil ruins. They're out there, so we want to celebrate those. And also, Charleston is a great place, and we want to let this island be inspired by some of the things that Charleston does really well, the rest of the peninsula. So that carries on into how the plan was developed. All right, next slide. But very quickly, some of the key elements that we want to focus on, again, I talked about the standard oil ruins. Those are up there to the, that's the northeast. And then to the kind of the west side, the Robert Mills ruins there. And then just to the north, the historic cemeteries, and actually Magnolia Cemetery, which is on the National Register of Historic Places, is actually north of this. It's kind of off the photo here, but the idea is we wanted to make sure the plan was very sensitive to those cemeteries as well as to the neighboring Bridgeview development right there. And then of course, like I talked about last time, this will be viewed, this island will be very much from the approach into Charleston from Mount Pleasant. So those views from the Ravenel Bridge are key. So next slide, Christopher, next click. So one of the key components of this, you know, it's an island, but we want to figure out a way to make sure it feels like it's part of the city. So we took the grid of East Central and pulled that across. Next slide, Christopher. And one more. And basically that's how our grid, the lower part of it on our plan, one more click, Christopher, and then you can stop for a second. And so we wanted to pull the grid as best we could into our development. And then not unlike, if you remember that slide I showed from a map of 1877 last time, the Lower Peninsula, you know, it has sort of an angle as well because it's based on sort of a response to the context of our Lower Peninsula. And then as it hits Buchanan Street, it goes north and south. Not unlike that here, it actually makes sense to go north and south with our grid on this island. So what this, next slide. So what this grid does is it allows us to have, one more click, have view corridors, if you remember, from all the streets to the water, just about all the streets. So that is a huge thing. Again, not unlike Lower Peninsula. And another thing that's very important to point out is all of the streets on the periphery of the island are outboard of the development. So again, think about Murray Boulevard, which is much wider in terms of the boulevard, but it's not any different here in that if one was on a street, the buildings would be on one side inboard, and then all of the water, all those views, all that access would be on the other side, which again is a huge positive for the development. All right, next slide. Okay, so a couple of things, and I'll go through this quickly. Other areas where we connected to the environment are click would be the top right there. Those are the standard oil ruins. We've located a pretty significant park there. That street is on axis with those ruins. Another click, Christopher. The Robert Mills ruins are there at the west, so we've designated that a interpretive park. Click again. We have on axis, that's Romney Street there in the middle. We have a very significant dock that could be used for potentially a ferry. So think of the scale of our waterfront park. Next slide, next click. Down at the south, that's a different environment. That's in a creek, and so we have a much more softer type of park with crabbing docks. Next click. We've located ball fields. Again, there aren't many ball fields up in this part of the city, and that does a couple things. One, it's a really nice buffer for the adjacent development there with Bridgeview, and again, like I talked about with the historic cemeteries. Another click. Singleton Park, technically it's not in the PUD, but through improvements to our PUD, we're going to be able to ensure that that park, which is owned by Dominion, will end up being a city park. It'll be owned by the city, but we're able to do some of the things that Dominion needs in terms of their substations in our PUD, which will help that park. And then the last click is our kind of crown jewel. We have this almost 2 mile long pedestrian trail that encircles the entire island. That will be, really fantastic for anyone. I can imagine myself riding my bike over and just going around that trail often. So, all right, next slide. So I'll go through these quickly. You remember the street types from last time. I'm not going to go through all these in detail again. We've got 4 major streets. And again, we're just showing the major streets. Through time, smaller streets will come in. There's no way that these could be the end-all blocks, because just the way you build things, you can't have giant, mega buildings. It just doesn't work for fire districts. It doesn't work for just how you actually build, actually use buildings. But these are the primary the streets. And I guess the key takeaway I hope you remember from last time is the 2 larger streets that we have, the Boulevard Street, which is the green one in the middle, that's Romney, and the red ones, which we are calling primary streets. Those have designated bike lanes that are protected from the rest of the traffic. So you've got a bike lane, and then a 3-foot raised planting area, and then physical traffic for the cars. And what that signifies to us is that we're taking alternative transportation seriously. It's not just recreational bicycles just riding around on a Sunday. Bicycles are a mode of transportation. And so, next slide, Christopher. We've incorporated, this slide shows all of the bike routes and pedestrian routes, and then how they connect to others in the peninsula. So again, that goes back to one of the principles. Next slide. All right, so height districts. Again, as Brian said, we're in a really crazy height district now, and it's zoned for the giant cranes that you see there along the port. And so we've got 4 height districts. Hopefully you remember, but the red there in the middle, that's where we've clustered the taller buildings, the 12 stories. Remember, just across the street in the Upper Peninsula District, 12 stories is allowed. We have put all of the lower heights on the periphery. And then one thing I keep forgetting to point out, but that sort of yellowish tan area there, that's an entertainment district. That's 2 stories. That's not technically a public park, but that, just by being designated as an entertainment district, will ensure that the public has one more kind of amenity built in. Next slide. I'm going through these very fast. All right, so this is a quick view. We modeled the whole island. Don't get too wrapped up in the buildings, but the idea is just, this is showing how the heights could work. And the takeaway here, so this view is, if you're sort of hovering over kind of near where Magnolia Cemetery is, that's bridge view just to the bottom of the screen to the right. And so this shows where we put the ball fields. It shows how low the heights are on the outside of the island. And again, it kind of clusters the taller buildings where we think they ought to go. Next slide. All right, so this is the last, just about it, so the open space. Again, so being able to have those heights and push those buildings in meant that we put all of the open space on the outside. So click, Christopher, please. So we've got a significant amount of open space. And I think there's been a little bit of confusion. What we put in the PUD was, we're just listing what the bare minimum city requirements are, not what our minimums are. And our minimum is 70 acres. And so if you look at those 2 designations over there, so the open space for a PUD of this size, the city requires 20% for a typical PUD. We are including 36%. So it's a difference of about 30 acres. And then on the usable open space, we're required to have, just bare minimum, we'd be required to have 25% or just under 10 acres. And then that's just what the city requires. What we're putting in the PUD, and it's clearly in the language, is that we have 56% of the open space, or almost 40 acres. So that's a big deal. So we've really gone to a lot of trouble to make sure there's a lot of open space. Again, that's what we heard often. And again, it's always been in the plan, but we just want to make sure that's clear to everyone. All right, so last slide, and I'll go quickly here. So what I want to wrap up with is what we heard from last time. The comments were really good from the commission, and there weren't a lot of specific things to change for the plan, but one of the key things we heard was about the community outreach. We need to do more of that. And just to kind of reiterate what some of it's already been said, since we've met with you all a month ago, we have met individually or spoke directly with East Central, East Side, North Central, and the Wagner Terrace neighborhoods. We've met with Cool Blow Owners Association. We set up a website, and we've gotten over 1,000 views from individual people, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. It's been difficult during the pandemic, but it's kind of interesting to have 1,000 people view something. And I don't know that if we had a public meeting, we would have had 1,000 people. So that's kind of interesting. That also, the website also had a way for us to receive public comments. So we've gotten some public comments in there, and they haven't been anything very different from what we've heard in all of our other meetings. Of course, we've met with the advocacy groups, Historic Charleston Foundation, Preservation Society, Coastal Conservation League numerous times. We've heard their concerns and tried to respond as best we could to them. And then, of course, like we've said before, and Christopher talked about a little bit, I wasn't involved until the last several months, but their members of the team have been involved on this in public outreach for this island for over 10 years. And that involved charrettes, public presentations, meetings with the school board, the mayor, city staff, city and county councils. And I think the takeaway from that is, the comments have been consistent. And I think we've responded to them. Connection to the environment, bike connectivity, public transportation, resiliency, and green methods. So it's been good to kind of confirm that the issues haven't really changed that much, and that we've basically adapted to that. Another thing that we heard is workforce housing. And again, I'll just say one more time, it's a big deal. We heard from the city to be able to provide permanent workforce, and we can go through after all this the sort of the details that Christopher and the planning department want, but that's very important. So we've increased it per what we had last time. So we had 10% last time, it was permanent. Now we have 20%. Again, half of that will be permanent, and the other half will fade out after a certain period. And again, other than the one we just saw before, one of the agenda items, I don't know of any other PUD that has permanent workforce housing on the peninsula. So we're very proud of that. There's no option to provide a fee in lieu of workforce housing. So that's clear in the PUD. And then other things we heard. The traffic impacts are important. And so one thing, I think it's clear, but the PUD cannot grow until the traffic improvements are made. And, we can't build that bridge until a certain percentage is built out. And Christopher tied in some things that the city would like to see in terms of how the density might work and ensure that mixed uses will work. So we feel like we're responding to everything that's been brought up about that. And definitely we heard that those off and on-site traffic improvements are important to make sure we have that neighborhood in East Central is safe for children and residents. Again, sustainability is important. That's integral to all the architectural principles that will be coming down the line. I've already talked about some of this, about the infrastructure and the alternate forms of transportation. And one thing I want to point out about sustainability, it's not just environmental. I think the idea of having a social economic mix of uses, that's also sustainability. It's sustainable in terms of keeping our community diverse. And again, just to remind everybody, this is where development ought to be. This is on a landfill in the heart of our city. It's not some greenfield site where we're going to mow down a bunch of trees outside of the city and you have a lot of sprawling traffic. This is right where development ought to occur. And it's not easy to do, but this is where it ought to be. And that's a sustainable approach. All right, and then the last thing that I have, and it's a little bit repetitive, but again, back to the open space. We have a good bit more than the minimum, and that's great. It allows us to do some things that makes it a better place. And then we have, again, I just want to point out the docks, the ball fields, and the various public amenities that will be usable by everyone. These won't be closed off. They'll always be open and they'll always be public. And so I think that is a super fast wrap up of the plan, and as a group, we'll take turns responding to any questions that you might have.
Great. Is there someone else we're going to hear from the team?
Yes.
Eddie, is there someone else on your team we're going to hear from next?
That's all. I think all of us might answer questions individually, but
okay. Great, thank you, Eddie. Before we move on to comments, I had a quick question, or I was going to ask if there's any, not the discussion, but any commission members had questions of the presentation, just for clarification purposes before we move on with the public. Chris, can you just show me where that particular interest to me on the scale here, where the historic cemetery district, point that out. I'm getting a little lost there.
Can you see the cursor moving?
Yep.
This is the cemetery area up in here. And then Magnolia Cemetery is further to the north. And then this is the Bridgeview development right in here.
I got you. All right, I'm with you now.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you. Did any other commission members just have any questions, just for clarification before we move on? We get comments? Just I thought with them just presenting, it may be timely if there's any clarification we needed. Anyone? Okay. If not, I guess we'll go on. We have several people, I think, that Chloe, Christopher, that wanted to speak on this. I know, did Miss Johnson want to speak? I see her name on here, maybe not.
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, great, thank you.
So thank you again, commissioners, and thank you, Eddie and Brian, for your presentation. You all know as commissioners, and the public recognizes the importance of workforce and affordable housing in our community. And it does not simply deal with housing as a place to live, but housing as it relates to health, stability, jobs, employment, and literally making ends meet. And so housing is not just about affordability relative to housing structure, it's about economic development, and it's really about providing a place. Charleston is a beautiful place to live, and we should literally make that beautiful for every citizen in our community. So naturally, when we think about workforce housing, when we think about affordable housing, those are important to persons at every economic level in our community. And I would say to us, as we think about the number of units is very important. What is equally, if not more so important, is having units into perpetuity. To date, we do not have a PUD on the peninsula or otherwise in the city of Charleston that provides units into perpetuity. The land trust that we recently developed will have units into perpetuity. The city has an internal first-time home ownership program that allows for 90-year restrictions. We got close to perpetuity there, but not fully. And I said, why is it so important to us? Literally every time affordability restrictions expire, we're having to play catch up. We're trying to figure out how to replace those units so people are not having to move to Goose Creek and Monk's Corner to live. Where this property is located and what it will provide is critical to persons who want to live on the peninsula, who currently work on the peninsula, our teachers, our firefighters, and those who right now are commuting out of the peninsula only to have to come back the next day. So there are certainly environmental impacts and other impacts if we have housing outside of our urban core. When we think about cost and financing affordable housing costs as much to produce as market rate housing. Affordable housing is harder to produce because the margins are not as large. The property that the Housing Authority is building right now at Meeting and Lee Street, vertical construction on that property is $18 million. Now, fortunately, because it is the Housing Authority, we will have that for perpetuity. Anytime there is any other nonprofit and or for-profit that is building affordable and or workforce housing, there is a time limit on those units. When we have time limits on units, we're then trying again to figure out how we come up with the financing, how we come up with the land, how do we make housing happen that we then lose because the affordability period has burned off. We appreciate the fact that this group of developers was forward thinking, and our planning team has even gone further and made other requirements that will enable the city and the residents who will reside at this property affordable units beyond any of us sitting here. So I don't want us to lose sight of the value of that, because it's very difficult to put a monetary price on that, but it goes beyond this conversation, and it leaves a legacy for the city that says we care about our citizens at every economic level, and we want to ensure for the long term that housing is available in the city of Charleston. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. You know, Eddie, Mr. Bello, one more question comes to mind from me. You have a lot of open space on the plan, which is great. Where would people, is there parking? You know, I live West Ashley. People that bike and walk to that area, it's not a question, but would there be ample parking for people that commute to come to that area to have the access to vision of the water and access to those vision corridors?
Well, yeah, hey, Charlie. You know, I think, of course, you know, this is a big scale plan. This is not this is the macro level. We haven't designed every little thing, but if there's going to be access, we're going to have parking. You know, that's just going to have to be built in somehow, but it won't work unless people can get to it. But remember,
right,
we don't have every little you know, square foot design. There's a lot to be developed, and that's going to occur over time. It may be, you know, a portion of this will be developed earlier than the rest of it, and certainly there's going to be plenty of open land for a long time, and there'll be parking lots for people that work out there.
Great, thank you, and you're right, because thank you, because you said it, because we've been talking about this property for 15 years probably, so we hope it is sooner rather than later, but thank you for that. Chloe, or Christopher, do we want to now go into comments? Is anybody signed up to speak?
Yes, we have 3 people signed up to speak, and then a long list of comments that Christopher will then read into the record.
Great.
For the record, the folks who have signed up to speak have not said they were necessarily in favor or opposed. All the comments we've received are for comment only.
Okay.
The first person we have is Ms. Cashin Drolet. Let me enable your microphone. Okay, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Hello, can you hear us?
Cashin, you're unmuted. You can speak whenever you're ready.
Chloe, there must be some technical. Can we go on to the next person and come back to that?
Yes.
Or you tell me.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. So Cashin, I'm going to mute you, but keep your microphone enabled, and go to Christopher King, who's the next person on the list. Okay, Christopher King, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak whenever you're ready.
Mr. King, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you all. Christopher King of the Preservation Society. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak. As we've stated before, the society, we do support very much so the development of this site, and we think the plans are moving in the right direction. And we do believe that this is the best direction yet for Laurel Island. However, we continue to have significant concerns with deficiencies in the language of the PUD. It basically promises a lot, but doesn't require it. And most significantly, we really are concerned by the lack of community involvement and engagement to date. And I would like to clarify, this is a massive entitlement. To Mr. Morgan's point, they are heavy industrial, which at 196 acres would limit them to about 3,800 housing units. So this is obviously a lot more than that, and that's not a bad thing, but let's be candid about it. I also want to call to your attention today that we received numerous emails from people that were unable to submit comments through the city website. Really appreciate Christopher and Chloe really getting on that, responding quickly and verifying that it was working. But whether people weren't using Chrome or it was something altogether different, we were notified of numerous people who were unsuccessful in submitting their comments, which included the head of the East Side neighborhood as well as the head of the East Central neighborhood. We forwarded their comments to the city staff on their behalf, but we're very concerned that there are those who wanted to speak that were unable to. And we really implore you not to improve a plan of this size without there being more community work. People are struggling to understand it and struggling to share their concerns. Over the past few weeks, there have been virtual presentations of the plans, but no discussion of the PUD. And developers, yeah, they're collecting comments on the website, but that website doesn't even contain a copy of the PUD as well. So despite reaching out to the applicant immediately following the July meeting, we only received the PUD about 5 days ago. And frankly, we just have to demand better. And we also need to demand better of the PUD itself. And we ask that you not focus on the drawings, but on the language of the PUD. We urge you to challenge the fine print, because if this is approved, it becomes the law of the land and there's no opportunity to go back. We would like to draw your attention to the land use plan and the predictability that we think is so important. But Section 5422 of the zoning ordinance requires PUD master plans to include a land use plan that includes the location, approximate net acreage and gross acreage of each type of residential, mixed use, office, commercial, industrial, open space, recreational area, and water body, as well as existing land uses adjacent to the PUD. And so the proposed PUD before you doesn't meet the requirements of the ordinance or the standards of the city. We also think that trip generation as a mechanism to adjust uses is flawed, and we think it's imperative that a land use plan be incorporated into this before it's approved. We do applaud the workforce housing, and this represents the single biggest opportunity that we're ever going to have to make a meaningful impact on what Ms. Gianna Shaw Johnson so eloquently stated. You know, we have a crisis in our region, and we really commend the commitment to providing workforce housing in perpetuity, but we do think that 10% is below the standard. We'd like to see more. And to be clear, we disagree. We don't see this as 20% as proposed. The 10% short term starts upon approval of the PUD. And, you know, within 10 years, you know, from now, coupled with the necessary time to put in the infrastructure, to engineer the settlement solution, we feel like this is a hollow offer, and we ask that you really please see through that. We would ask that the workforce housing be increased to a genuine 20% of all housing on Laurel Island. And then to the design review process, the PUD really, and there's a problem of not having a land plan, it provides an unprecedented level of control that's being ceded by the city to the developer, and we urge you not to do that. This private review board can determine the size, footprint, form, design of significant buildings, as well as independently adjust key zoning regulations such as height districts and densities. Without a land use plan, they could approve the Mall of America out there, or they could relocate the 12-story height district to be directly adjacent to the Charleston Cemetery's historic district, and no one could prevent it. We need a land use plan, and we also believe that the design review and the guidelines should be handled by the DRB. Furthermore, we believe that not having parking requirements and deferring this to the LIBAR is unsound. As to the green space, we feel that the 20 to 23% shown on the plans looks very positive. But again, please read the language of the PUD, as it, in our opinion, it allows a minimum of 5% or just 9.8 acres until the development's complete, which could take decades or more. And I appreciate Mr. Bello's point, but the PUD does not read as he described it. And I urge you to verify this. If it is as he said, then please just remove the reference to the minimum. It doesn't need to be there. If they're going to do 23, we don't need to state the minimum. So we would ask that you please remove the loopholes in this PUD language. And to traffic, there's been very little discussion. We're very concerned about nearby neighborhoods and Kublo Street in particular. It's one of the most narrow right-of-ways that 2 cars can't pass on currently, and we think it's incompatible with the proposed traffic plan. We're really concerned about the Meeting Street Academy, whose pickup and drop-off is on Kublo Street, as well as the residents that live on Kublo and Cedar and adjacent streets. And there are many questionable aspects of the plan, and we think it needs to be challenged. Finally, when this application first came forward in December on your agenda for the December Planning Commission, we were surprised that there had been no dialogue, and we reached out to the applicant and urged them to engage with the community and offered to help. But unfortunately, that didn't happen until after the July meeting, during a time when in-person engagement is so challenging. We ask that you require the applicant and the city to pause and undertake a comprehensive and deliberate effort to engage with the community. We want to ask, what is the rush? This is so important, let's get it right. We ask that you recommend disapproval of the application as presented tonight and require the applicant and the city to do the work needed to ensure the success of Laurel Island. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. King. Chloe, who's next?
Okay, we have Cashin now. She's calling in from her phone. So Cashin, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, Chloe.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening. Okay, great. Thank you. Cashin Drolet with Historic Charleston Foundation. HCF began our discussions of the PUD proposal for Laurel Island back in February when the Laurel Island team made a presentation to the HCF Advocacy Committee. HCF is generally supportive of development of Laurel Island, and our goal in approaching this PUD proposal has been to ensure that it becomes a model for infill development on the peninsula, enhances the surrounding neighborhoods, and contributes to Charleston's overall sense of place. Since that initial February presentation, HCF and our advocacy committee have been in ongoing communications with the Laurel Island team. HCF has made a number of suggestions for improvement, exchanged several memoranda with the team, posed a myriad of questions, and advocated for substantial changes within numerous facets of the proposal. As such, I believe that HCF has made a meaningful impact in improving the PUD proposal from when it was first presented in February to the version that you are considering this evening. We are appreciative of the attention the Laurel Island team has paid to our comments and suggestions, and appreciative that many of them have been incorporated. Key improvements to the initial proposal suggested by HCF that we believe are worthy of highlighting are slowing the process to allow more time for all to review and insisting upon the initial information-only presentation at the July meeting. A clearly articulated vision for the entire development as evidenced in the 5 guiding principles in section 2.3. Establishment of fixed bones of the development, including principal corridors along Romney, Coolbo, and Brigade Street that terminate at the water, adhering to Charleston's historic street pattern. Clear locations for public access to the waterfront via a dock with ferry access and crabbing docks, as well as full perimeter views of and access to the water with no private parcels obscuring that. Enhancements to the public realm and establishment of clear locations for park and recreational space. Commitment to building height locations on the island to provide an interesting and varied skyline while being sensitive to surrounding neighborhoods. And lastly, laudable plans to provide workforce housing and making it an integral part of the entire vision of the development. The latest proposal for Laurel Island is a marked improvement from where the conversation began. However, there are still areas where HCF has concern and where additional improvements should be made. With regard to the public realm, we are impressed with the amount of usable park space and the desire to provide more open space than the 20% required by the city ordinance. The perimeter park along the entire edge of the island will be a huge recreational asset for the peninsula. However, the Laurel Island team has committed to pocket parks internal to the island in the PUD document. We believe the development would benefit from a central square or urban plaza like Marion Square in the densest, most urbanized part of the island to provide some relief and open space. Workforce and affordable housing are one of Charleston's greatest challenges and one of the biggest impediments to quality of life in the city. Through the development of Laurel Island, Charleston is presented with a tremendous opportunity to tackle this issue and provide an impactful amount of affordable housing on the peninsula, at a scale unachievable elsewhere. We applaud the Laurel Island team commitment to setting aside 10% of the proposed housing units as affordable in perpetuity. To my knowledge, no other development team working in the city of Charleston has endeavored to add to our workforce housing stock in this significant way. During the Informational Planning Commission meeting last month, commissioners indicated that they would like to see more workforce housing provided. This updated PUD proposal designates an additional 10% of workforce housing to remain as such for a 10-year period. However, we believe the 10-year period should be extended to 25 years to mirror what the city would require if MUWH zoning had been pursued. HCF is mission-driven to protect and preserve cultural and historic resources in the Low Country, and we're encouraged to see the cultural resources study included in the PUD proposal and the trail space that will provide access to the Robert Mills and Standard Oil ruins. However, we'd like a little more detail in the management plan for these resources that would include documentation, interpretation, and stabilization plans for these significant resources. The Robert Mills ruins are abutted to the east by a 12-story height district and to the south by Romney Street and the 8-story height district. In reviewing the sight lines for the island's allowable height districts, we'd like to see some sort of a height buffer or step down so that the skyline doesn't drop so dramatically at that western portion of the island facing the Robert Mills ruins. Lastly, we've had a lot of internal conversations about the design review process for Laurel Island and how the LIBAR will take shape and function as found in section 13.1. While we recognize the need for the City of Charleston's BAR to play a role in establishing the design principles and LIBAR appeal process, we are cautious of attributing additional workload to the BAR as they can already be taxed by their current scope of work. In the same section, we'd ask that the language be enhanced to better link the 5 guiding principles defined in section 2.3 to the Laurel Island design principles to ensure that the design principles adhere to the overarching guiding principles for the entire development. Similarly, we would like to see a strong commitment to sustainable and resilient design and building practices emphasized in this section as part of the future design principles. And that would conclude my remarks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. Chloe, is Mr. Green next, Lawrence Green?
Yes. Okay,
Great.
Lawrence, I have enabled your microphone whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, sir. My name is Lawrence Green. I'm a resident of the East Central community. I live at 16 Boyer Court. You know, it's a couple streets back from the entrance to Laurel Island. I was asked, I guess it was 3 days ago now, to speak by our neighborhood association president, Ms. Elizabeth Jenkins. And within that time frame, like I've been able to, you know, do an immense amount of research on this and speak to Mr. Rhett Rodenbach at the Revere Group about what was going on. I guess just a simple ask. I would ask for this to be deferred from the position of public outreach and public engagement. I understand that they have been able to have meetings on the east side and with North Central, but the East Central community, we've not had a meeting about this. Me and Ms. Jenkins met with Mr. Reidenbach in March of 2017. And I'm not saying this is any fault of anyone in general, but we have not had a meeting. So the Revere Group has agreed to present to the East Central neighborhood. We have made flyers and we're going to have a Zoom meeting on Monday at 5:30 for those who cannot make it, you know, have internet or get on the computer or whatever. The Revere Group has agreed to give presentations for people at a time. I started passing out these flyers today, 2 hours before this meeting, and I made it up Cedar Street, Romney Street, Indian Street, and Boyer Court, and I bumped into, I made it to 30 houses because I was knocking on the doors and talking to people as I gave it out. I ran into one person that knew anything about this, like anything, period. Like from what it is that I've looked at, there's a lot of great things, you know, in this plan, and I think this will be great for Charleston. But the way, you know, these type of things are supposed to work, you know, just as everyone has spoken on up until this point, is there supposed to be public engagement. And I understand that there has been public engagement over the past decade or so, and the plan has morphed. But I have been in East Central. I can say East Central is a different place from 2013 to 2015 to 2017 till now. And the people who currently live here, I think, need to know about what's going to happen in the neighborhood in Charleston that's going to be most directly impacted by Laurel Island. So I just ask that we get to have this meeting on Monday and this vote be deferred.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I appreciate your comments. Chloe, I think that's all the people that signed up to speak. I know there's written has anybody else signed up to speak, Chloe?
No one else has signed up to speak, but so now, yes, we'll just move to written comments, which Christopher has.
Chris, I think there's 22 written comments, and I'm not trying to stifle any of them. They're all very, very important, but any you can condense or I would greatly appreciate. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I will start going through these. Okay. The first one is from Susan Lyons at 7 Gadsden Street. I'm a resident of the Charleston Peninsula, and I'm concerned that the Laurel Island project that comes before you for approval on August 19th is not ready for final decision. The PUD as written leaves many unanswered questions about zoning, transportation, parking, public spaces, and governance, among other issues. Furthermore, a project of this magnitude is not well known to the residents of the peninsula, as partly due to the COVID environment everyone is working under, but full community engagement has not been sought before this vote. I therefore request that you defer this application so more specificity can be made public. Second item from Elaine and James Doyle in Radcliffe Borough. Every commission member and planning department staff should watch the Preservation Society's 31-minute webinar on the Laurel Island PUD prior to tomorrow's meeting. Not enough workforce housing, lack of specificity, loss of city control, incomplete traffic analysis, and inadequate community input, defer or deny. The third one is from Parker Asher at 1 Cool Blow. I have a few questions I hope to have addressed during tomorrow's Zoom call regarding the Laurel Island project. The topic is Morris Island. It is Morrison Drive. Okay, he's got the description. What impact will the project have on flooding on Cool Blow Street and Nassau Street and on 1 Cool Blow Street? Will the flooding be addressed or will it increase? What impact will the project have on Singleton Park? What impact will the project have on traffic and flooding on Cool Blow Street, for the Meeting Street Academy, and 1 Cool Blow Street? Okay, the fourth one is from Kimberly Alexander. I have a question I hope to have addressed during tomorrow's Zoom call regarding the Laurel Island project. Why is there a need for 2 bridges? Cool Blow Street is a small street that cannot support a lot of traffic, and the children at Meeting Street Academy would be put in harm's way. It seems completely unnecessary and dangerous for the children. The fifth is from Benjamin Linhart at 37 Church Street. Developers offered a commendable 39.2 acres of open usable land at Laurel Island. The PUD, however, only commits to 10 acres of usable land. The PUD legal language should be increased to 39.2 acres to agree with the offer of the developer. As much open space as is available absolutely is essential in such a large development. From Elizabeth Jenkins in East Central. I, Elizabeth Jenkins, president of the East Central Community, stand in objection to the Laurel Island project because it will gravely impact traffic and change our way of life in this community. From Lawrence Wetzel, I support the recommendations of the Preservation Society of Charleston to modify the PUD for greater public input, larger percentage of public green space, and longer and more affordable housing. From Lisa Field, I don't believe the PUD has enough specifics for what the development will actually look like. In addition, with their own BAR committee, we will not have any recourse if they make changes to percentages of office, residential, or open spaces at a later date. From Jane Tyler, I think it's imperative that these planning stages of the development of Laurel Island be given much greater scrutiny. A very detailed plan for the development should be made public with firm information about use, density, and height. More land should be allocated for green space and public space. Traffic impact should be considered into the next 2 decades at least. Development of Laurel Island could be an exciting new chapter for Charleston, but at present there are too many unnecessary questions and too few firm specific plans for land use. Okay, now we're going to have several comments that are much, much longer, and I am happy to read them all. These are going to be difficult to paraphrase as I've gone through them. I didn't know if you all wanted to have a time limit on these or if you want me to go through the whole thing.
You know what, I think, I don't know what other commission members think. I think they're all important. I know I read through them. I think we did all receive these in writing as well, didn't we, Chloe? I think you sent all these out to commission members, so we all have the comments.
Correct.
I don't know what other commission members think. I'd love to hear from them. I think it's important that maybe Christopher does read over these so that they are on the record.
Okay.
May I
Harry?
question?
Yes, ma'am.
If we've all read these,
Johnson?
is there a way to go on record and state that we've already read these so that it's known that we have, absorbed the information rather than you reading them to us again?
I'd be okay with that. Other commission members, again, maybe we could read the names about the comments, just the names into the record, if not the whole comments, but other commission members, thoughts? Mr. Lassane, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
You're muted.
I keep hitting the space bar and it just moves the cursor across the question mark, the questions. I concur with Ms. Johnson that I think we've all had opportunity to read the comments. I do think it's important to try to give a sense to the attendees at the meeting what the comments were, and out of respect to those who did take the time to submit comments, I do think we owe them the respect of acknowledging their comments. The best way to do that, I'm not entirely sure, and I think we would reach the point of diminishing returns if we tried to read each of them word for word. So I ask for comments from the rest of the commission.
Maybe just in thinking, maybe Mr. Morgan reads the name of the person and the intent, whether they, anyway, anyone else want to speak from commission on this?
Ms. Jacobs has her hand raised.
Ms. Jacobs?
Yeah, yes, this is a tough one because if we were there present and those people were standing in front of us, they would be reading all this to us instead of us having the benefit of looking at it. I personally appreciate the fact that we have it where I can reread what they've said, like I might have missed a comment. But I also agree with Angie that maybe if we read their names, give a flavor of like what their major concern is. Like, are they majorly concerned with traffic? Do they live in the area? These sorts of things. Because most of the ones I read, they think there's some good things, but they have a bunch of concerns. And a lot of them were concerns that I have as a commissioner. So I don't think we should disrespect them, but, to spend an hour reading those is a little bit time consuming. So if there's some way to synthesize it,
Well, and if we were a meeting, a lot of times we would have a time frame that each person speak 2 or 3 minutes, so we might have a time frame. But other commission members, I'm fine with Mr. Morgan reading the name of the person and a general flavor of what they're saying. I'd be fine with that if the other commission.
Charlie, if I may, and I know everyone is exhausted by the length of the comments, and Christopher is probably thirsty. But one of the functions of the comments is questions posed directly to the applicant. So if the applicant hasn't read all of the comments, then they might not be able to respond to everything that's shared. So that's just one important function of the comments being read aloud.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm with you, but when I read through these, and I've read them all, I think there's a lot of points that are made over and over and over. Again, if we're missing any points, we need to give those so that the applicant can respond to them. I agree with you 100%. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Jacobs made me think of something, and that is perhaps Christopher could read, we could put a time limit, just as we would if this were an in-person meeting. We would have a time limit. Christopher can read 2 minutes of the letter, and then we move to the next one.
I'm with you. The only concern about I have some of that is sometimes the end of the letter says what the concerns are. So I agree with you, Chris. I think we go in that direction, and that would be healthy for me. If you could surmise it as quickly or to get the key points.
Yeah, I will do my best to focus on questions and new items being raised and
Mr. Bailey's raising his hand.
Opinions, things like that. Just questions.
Mr. Bailey?
I don't.
Mr. Bailey?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask this question, but I believe it was Mr. King indicated that there were some problems submitting comments. Do we know how significant that problem was?
Our system was running appropriately. We did check in it as within 10 minutes of his alerting us to that issue, and the system was running properly. There are some instances where individuals need to use Google Chrome software to access the system, and that may not have been going on with a few individuals. We also have a number that someone can call if they're having trouble, and we reiterated that to Mr. King, and to my knowledge, I don't think we had anybody call that number. So I'm not aware that there were more than 3 or 4 individuals that he cited who had some trouble with it.
And I appreciate Mr. King also forwarding some emails that people said they couldn't get through. I think he forwarded them to us, I think. Mr. Bailey, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I agree with maybe there's a hybrid where maybe there's a time limit on what Christopher reads, but given the fact that, I mean, I know we didn't get the comments until about 3:30 today, and I mean, I did race through and read them all, but it was a lot to read between 3:30 and the meeting start, and given the notion that maybe there was some problem submitting comments, and this is a pretty big deal, and we're in an awkward situation where people do have to submit in a way that's different from normal. I think that something has to be read, and maybe 3 minutes, just setting a 3-minute limit is the right thing to do. I know I wouldn't win any popularity contest saying that we ought to just sit here for an hour listening to stuff being read. I just think this is way too important. I mean, that, you know, when you think about the things that people in the city are frustrated with, you know, behind flooding, it's development and traffic, I think. And this is maybe the biggest proposal that we'll see.
I'm with you 100%, Mr. Bailey. And the last thing we want to do is stifle anyone's comments because they are that important. And this is, as you said, I think Ms. Lemphasis will know, other than Daniel Island and Carolina Bay, one of the biggest rezonings we've had. And so it's that important. So, Mr. Morgan, will you go ahead and read again, if you can? I know you can't decipher, but you probably glance through these, the name of the person and any issues they have, if you can see that with the rezoning, so that they can be addressed by the applicant, included in their responses.
Okay. And I think Ms. Jacobs had raised her hand. Did she drop her
hand? Go ahead,
hand?
Ms. Jacobs.
You're on.
I also think it's important to listen based on, I'm listening to everybody chiming in, because I know with respect to the East Central neighborhood, I had asked to attend all of the neighborhood association Zooms that were held. And that one, there was some issues with holding that meeting. So if none of their issues are getting addressed here, maybe with Lawrence, Mr. Lawrence on the phone, he can hear the comments may be addressed by other people who have submitted. So I think it may be important to listen to some of these.
I'm with you. Mr. Morgan, you want to go ahead?
All right.
And I think you left.
So the next one is from John Kennedy. He's providing a bulleted list of issues he sees for the neighborhood he lives in. Blocks appear to be at least 4 times the size of adjacent city blocks. The Cedar Street extension practically goes through marshland and is prone to flooding during normal and high tides. Cool Blow Street floods regularly at the intersection of North Nassau. Talks about Meeting Street Academy. We've already talked about that. There's barely room for 2 cars to pass, nor is it safe for parents who are actively engaging with children. Families utilize Singleton Park for recreation, which often means children riding bikes in the street. Cool Blow Street Bridge will compromise the New Market Creek habitat for native wildlife. The parking study in the formal PUD documentation is too high level, not specific, and not shown in the plans. In the study, nearly 100% of the intersections in the neighborhood were labeled as getting a traffic light when warranted. A clearer definition of this plan needs to be in place. Expecting existing residents to deal with this insurgence of traffic from new residents as well as ongoing construction traffic is not acceptable. Bridge connecting Laurel Island via Romney Street should be studied like it is the only option. Romney Street is much more commercial, wider, et cetera, et cetera. If the Coolblow Street Bridge is the only option, consider making the bridge U-shaped to dump the traffic onto North Morrison Drive. Rather than the quiet neighborhood street, large portion of the public green space and marshland is not usable. Let's see, what does the bridge look like? How tall is it? Let's see, I'm just scanning for other questions. As a resident of One Coolblow, I'm exceptionally disappointed the developer would not reach out to us and provide a heads up for their plans. Where do all the office workers and residents park? So that kind of sums up his comments here. Then I'm going to go on to Alex Pappas. Since this is a relatively massive and complex project, I would ask the city and developer to pause and take a more meaningful outreach to the community. Since there will be construction of 2 new bridges, need further assessment on impacts on peninsula roadways, traffic, and communities. The design review process, which calls for an internal review board, should instead be the purview of current city review and oversight process for construction. There needs to be a definitive plan for usable open green space demonstrated before approval. Workforce housing should be at least 20%. Specific plan for how the development will be built out, how uses will be distributed throughout the site, and a specific statement that there will be no erection of gated or controlled entrances. More specific land use plan is needed for the community to understand. All right, on to L. Hanlon. This is a huge project with the opportunity to be a beautiful addition to the Charleston community. However, there are too many gray areas. This project will greatly affect existing roads, as unclear what is planned for the improvement of these roads to handle greatly increased traffic. Additionally, as written, the plans for workforce affordable housing could expire before the first structures are built. 10 years is not enough time. The requirement should have no time limit. Charleston's in great need of affordable workforce housing. The requirement should be 20% rather than 10%. From English Drews, as a Hampton Park Terrace resident, I'm greatly concerned that during this period of pandemic, where citizens are struggling on many levels with many issues, that this would even be considered for approval without the ability for civic engagement and input. It is extremely disappointing that a development of this magnitude with potential for negative and positive impact to the community has had little to no community input or engagement. This should be delayed until 2021 at a minimum. I support the PSC's recommendations when this is revisited in the future. And then these, I think, are all things we've seen before, her recommendations there. So I'm going to skip those since we've already seen those. Waverly Bird, land use, a more specific land use plan is needed for the community to understand how uses will be distributed throughout the site, as well as the ultimate vision for how the development will be built out. Workforce housing, all right, they're doing similar stuff there. Similar comments that we've seen before. 2 new bridges, community outreach. Okay, so that was everything else she's saying has already been stated pretty much in the rest of her letter. From William Simpson, much too little time for adequate study of the PUD and much too little opportunity for public input. Request deferred action. PUD needs greater level of detail. How will all office workers, store employees get on and off the island through the 3 routes and onto Charleston's already overburdened arteries? From Jason Crowley with Coastal Conservation League. Dear Planning Commission members, Coastal Conservation League appreciates the opportunity to submit comments. Conservation League's followed the project for many years, met with the applicant, and significant property of 200 acres, last remaining large developable site within the urbanized area of Charleston. It's an appropriate place for responsible development in Charleston. This Planning Commission has enormous responsibility recognizing this. Unfortunately, the league was only provided a copy of the PUD document 5 days before the meeting, allowing such little time for thorough review of the plans begs the question of why the applicant is rushing through the process. Each time we've met with the applicant, the project was more fleshed out than before, which is positive, but it supports our position that the plans coming before you today are not ready for a vote from Planning Commission. The league is pleased the applicant has designated 36% of total area to remain open space. We would like to highlight that the recreational facilities are sited adjacent to Bridgeview Village community, which currently lacks access to public ball fields. We encourage the applicant and the city to take a step to further codify the PUD language that the ball fields will remain in this location, and that pedestrian access from Bridgeview Village will be provided. Brigade Street Bridge is not intended to be constructed until later in the development phasing. The community should not have to wait until that time to begin enjoying the recreational facilities planned for this site. Let's see, workforce housing is similar to what we've seen. Finally, the excessive block sizes outside the 8 and 12-story height districts remain a primary concern of the league with this project. The latest renderings by the applicant's design team clearly show the blocks in the northern portion of the site and lower height districts are overly large. In addition, the details of the blocks will be refined later in the process during the creation of the architectural standards development period is further support for the fact that the project is still not fully fleshed out and ready for a vote by the Planning Commission. In closing, suffice to say that the Planning Commission should not vote on this PUD until all documents are finalized, drafted, and presented. We would like to reiterate our appreciation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that was Jason Crowley. Okay, Elizabeth Cahill. This is a massive project that will have lasting ramifications. Please pause on this. Developer needs to submit a specific and detailed land use plan. Okay. Needs to be a higher percentage of open space legally required in the PUD itself. Neighborhood outreach and specific project has been insufficient. Okay. And very, very lengthy comments from Andrew Watkins. Yeah. One cool blow.
Right. I think many of those were covered, but go ahead, Chris, because I think we only got a couple of comments left, but hers is a long one.
Yeah. She thinks the application is insufficient, not enough detail. Not enough work to engage immediate adjacent community. Not happy with the virtual meeting. First, it's important to recognize that the Planning Commission does not have an individual or development entity standing before you saying this is our plan, we stand before it, and we will be there with you before in the community all the way through the implementation. What you have is a team of consultants and facilitators who are working to get this entitlement in place so the site can be sold to some future development group. This means that all assurances that the city and community have is quality and thoroughness of the PUD document. PUD document becomes the binding set of rules. Then she goes into PUDs versus zoning ordinance.
I think we've covered a lot of the ones that she says. I've read through this again,
and
I think we've covered a lot of these.
Yeah. Okay. Concerned about the timing of the 10 years on the affordable housing. Okay. Doesn't like the fact that the incentivized approaches employed in the Upper Peninsula zoning are not utilized here, and instead it's by right. Concerned about amplified music until 11:30. As a resident of One Cool Blow Street since 2012, I've been through several sessions with the discussion of the Cool Blow Bridge. It's been broached by various consultants. At no time has anyone responded to criticisms or concerns with any facts or demonstration of what impacts will truly be. Let there be no confusion. The residents of Cool Blow are fully opposed to Cool Blow Bridge, and many of us are aghast that the development team and city have continued to push this as a done deal. Okay, again, this is all about Cool Blow Bridge. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one from Kenny Kraft. I'm in favor of quality development on Laurel Island, but I'm afraid it's way too soon to approve a PUD application. The developer should allow for public input. One observation is that the block sizes appear way too large. This does not match the best practices for planning. The master plan PUD language deserves way more scrutiny. Then Therese Smythe says, I oppose the rezoning request. Today's comment because of only 10% work. Well, yeah, 10% workforce houses is what they're talking about. At a minimum of project like this that will not be complete for a number of years, we should have at least 20%. Okay, so we've got that. The city and developer need to make much more meaningful outreach to surrounding neighborhoods. Clear study of major traffic impact. And that is pretty much it. And then Latanya Gamble and Christopher King. Chloe, you have those letters in front of you. I think we've heard from Christopher
Mr. King.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard from Mr. King. The only
But
one I don't,
Christopher, did you
anything
grab
Ms.
it from
Gann?
the printer?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't get.
Yeah, and can we, Christopher, next time we have these, and next month, can we have their address? Can we ask the people, some did and most didn't, supply
do
their
ask
address if they weren't?
We do ask that they put that on there, and some people have not been.
Well, I think if they don't, I think like at a public hearing, we would ask for that for the records. I think that's important to have to get a
Agreed.
context of where these folks live or who they're representing. Chloe, did you have that other piece?
Christopher's grabbing it right now. I can
Okay.
start to read it to save us some
Okay,
time.
go ahead. Is it short? Is it long?
It's nicely put with bullet points and bolded letters.
Go ahead.
This is from the Eastside community from Latanya Gamble, and
Okay.
requesting more time to understand the complexity of the project and how it will affect the neighborhoods. Specifically, wanting more specific land use plan, increasing the workforce housing requirement. So similar to the other comments that have been shared, more specific language about the green space, looking at the design review process, the traffic impacts, and understanding that the complicated nature of community outreach in this time and giving more time to that. Specifically, please include the Bridgeview residents and residents that live on Romney Street, and in writing a letter or flyer to make sure they're aware.
Thank you, Chloe. So that, I think, concludes. We've got the public input, I believe. Now we're going to hear back from the applicants to address. I know there's a lot of stuff there. I don't know who's going to be responding from the applicants, whether it's going to be Mr. Bello or Mr. Hellman, but it seems like there's a common theme in there, and they've heard it, that there wasn't a lot of the public input. A lot of people don't feel like they were heard, but we'll ask them to respond to these comments.
He wanted to hear about public outreach.
Well, respond to any and all comments. That's your right to do that, to clarify or answer any comments that were brought up.
Well, I think as it relates to outreach, not only from an outreach standpoint, has this been something that Robert Clement has been working on for a very long period of time, as we discussed at the beginning. Over the past year, our conversation started working with larger community groups such as Historic Charleston Foundation, Preservation Society, and the Coastal Conservation League. Most recently, given our original application dated back to, I think, November or December of last year, and we were geared to go forward in March. Around the time that we knew you were going to start holding meetings again, we thought, and it was actually Historic Charleston Foundation's suggestion, that the first thing we do is have a public meeting through the Planning Commission where you weren't going to vote, but an information-only session. And that was really one of the key things I think we've done. But in addition to that, and as Commissioner Jacobs is fully aware, we saw her at a number of these meetings. I think actually every one of them. We met with all of the surrounding groups that the city of Charleston suggested we meet with, and to the ones that we heard from with Mr. Green. I know there were a number of communications with Ms. Jenkins about setting up a meeting. That meeting, for whatever reason, wasn't set, but we have certainly offered at every step of the way to have those conversations with her neighborhood, as we have with all the other neighborhoods, and incorporated those comments into the document that you have before you. Would you like us, Mr. Chairman, to just go through a number of the responses to the comments? How would you like us to go about
Yes, sir.
respond.
Yes, sir, I would. I think that would be appropriate, that anything you made a note of that you can address would be helpful to us.
I mean, there were 5, I think, key points that that I heard. One was outreach, which I think we've talked about here. There were some traffic questions, which Rhett I think can speak to. Green space issues, which Eddie or Rhett or I could speak to. Workforce housing and land use. So how we want to divide that up. I think as it relates to the PUD, Eddie, do you want to talk about the land use map and
Sure.
perhaps start there?
Sure, and I can't help myself. I have to say one more thing about public involvement. You know, I think we have done the best we can under the circumstances. We've done a great deal of public engagement, but I will say we have the overwhelming response to the plan has been very good. I think the notion of why the rush? Well, there's no rush. It's just we've gotten comments. Most of the comments, I'd say all of them, have been very positive. We haven't had anyone say, hey, why don't you put the high districts over there and don't have that many parks or change the grid. In the PUD language, it's actually very clear, but there's not been, I think the argument to delay, just to delay is not really fair. And I don't think it's right either. If we had a lot of public comments and there was a lot of outrage, the plan was terrible, well, of course we should delay. But if it's just a delay, just because we should delay because it's a lot of development, I don't know that that's right. And that's why you're the experts. That's why hopefully you've reviewed this and you understand the true issues, which we feel like we've resolved. That was my piece. I have to go ahead and say that. But speaking to, there have been several comments about requiring a more specific land use plan. And technically, well, first of all, we meet the PUD requirements. There's an exhibit in the document that lays out the land use. And the short answer is we don't want to define only office in this area, only multifamily in this area, only retail. That's not how community works. That's not what we want. It's not real. It's not organic. And that's just not part of the plan. I think we've been pretty clear about that. Certainly, there might be an area because of the way the height districts are laid out. The lower height districts are probably going to be more conducive to multifamily. Probably won't have a lot of office in those areas. But again, the goal has never been to define every single little block and every square inch of this property in a master plan. That's not how cities grow. That's not how a true good community would ever evolve. You want it to be organic. So I'm a little bit passionate about this, but I think some of that comes from just kind of maybe not clearly understanding the plan. So that was my speech on that. I can't remember if there's another thing that I was supposed to, the green space. Again, I think there's been unfortunately, some misinformation put out there. The PUD is very clear. We are well above what is required. We're proud of that. I mean, you look at the plan that you're looking at on the screen. It is almost 4 times as much usable open space as required. The net gain is 30 acres of usable open space above what would be typically required. And that's guaranteed. It's going to be public. It'll be open. So that, that argument, I get the concern, but it's clear. Just read the document. I think part of this, you've got to read the language. We've been very clear on that. So that was my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Addie, and members of the commission. My name is Rhett Reidenbach. I'm with the Revere Group. We're a local engineering company here in North Charleston, and I've been working on this plan for a number of years with Mr. Clement, and personally have participated in a lot of the outreach that we're taking credit for and describing to you guys this evening. And to echo what Mr. Green said, we had the distinct pleasure of meeting with the Eastside community back in 2016 in March. So we had a public meeting. We walked up and down Kubler Street a couple of months with Ms. Jenkins and Mr. Green. And then we tried, I personally tried a couple of times to schedule meetings with Ms. Jenkins in the East Central neighborhood. And I appreciate Mr. Green taking the initiative to reach out. We printed the flyers for him to use for the neighborhood. And hopefully we'll have a great turnout on Monday and have an opportunity to share with him a lot of the information we've been able to share with the East Side, Wagner Terrace, and North Central as it relates to the engineering, the infrastructure, the off-site challenges that we heard several comments that pertain to. And let's address them kind of one by one. Number one, drainage. The fact that we are on a landfill, the fact that we, over the number of decades that this island has been created, it's required fill, whether it's been dredge spoil, whether it's been municipal solid waste, whether it's been clean materials and put on top of it as a cap. It has allowed us to be able to design a series of infrastructure on the island that will stand the test of time, that will be resilient. We'll be adding a lot of fill on the site in order to raise the site higher than it is. It is already the highest elevations in all of Charleston. The center of the island is over 20 in elevation. On the edges of the perimeter, we have on average an elevation of 10. We're going to be able to fulfill the new requirements of the City of Charleston stormwater regs without hardly having to do much at all. We're going to have our pipes big enough to discharge the water it needs to discharge. It's going to be at an elevation. It'll be higher than the sea level rise in the future, and the ground will be high and dry and always able to withstand the storms that will come around. We're surrounded by water. We're not taking any of our stormwater into the neighborhoods. We're not planning on having any issues with overtaxing any existing infrastructure that's currently located in East Central. As a matter of fact, our traffic study that is very detailed, is required by the PUD, that is a 25-year planning view of all the intersections north of Mount Pleasant Street, beginning with Cunnington, all the way down meeting in Morrison Drive, down to Hugie Street. It studies 30 intersections for the next 25 years. It is the roadmap that we have to follow in order to fulfill the density that is written into this zoning document. It presents the intersection improvements that are required at each intersection. It defines the number of travel lanes that have to be serving the island. It talks about the importance of having 3 connection points in order to distribute the traffic into an urban grid that has an opportunity for more capacity. And so as we go through and make street improvements, and there's a number of streetscape projects that are going to occur where we're putting new sidewalks, we're putting in street lights, and we're putting in multi-use paths, and we're able to fix some of the drainage problems that are out there today. I know that the one Kublo neighborhood, when we met with the Homeowners Association, was really focused on the design details of Kublo Street and why Kublo Street has been chosen as the location for the bridge. And we're able to go through with the neighborhoods and explain, starting all the way from Brigade Street, all the way down to Cedar Street, all the cross streets that are there, the opportunities we studied on the Cook River Bridge, the opportunities we studied on interchanges off Morrison Drive, to prove that Kublo Street is really the only opportunity to meet the engineering criteria that we have to meet to get up and over Morrison Drive, up and over the railroad tracks, back on the island, and on the other side, back to the existing road grid, where we want to make sure we don't disconnect blocks from blocks that currently have access to streets. The street improvements on Kublo Street are not intended to make it a wider street. As a matter of fact, the number of lanes that are there today are the same number of lanes that are on Laurel Island that will receive that traffic. It's only 1 lane in each direction, 2 total lanes. The 50-foot road right-of-way that's there at Kublo Street now is typical of a 2-lane road. We don't plan on widening the road, making it any bigger than it is today, upsetting any of the features that are there with parallel parking and Main Street Academy, etc. But again, those aren't PUD issues. Those aren't zoning issues. Those aren't land use and density issues. Those are design issues that will fall out over time as we start to need to have the bridge in place, as we need to start seeing the infrastructure put in place to serve the site. The traffic counts are absolutely important to define the amount of density and land use that can go out there. The last thing we want to do is tax the infrastructure that serves this development to a level that affects the quality of life of the people around it, and it's not allowed by city code and DOT code. There's a lot of checks and balances that are in place at the city level and the DOT level. As this development continues to grow, that traffic study will always be tweaked and redone and updated as blocks and buildings begin to develop. So we think there's a lot of checks and balances that are in the PUD document that really make sure that it doesn't outpace the infrastructure, that the development is on the hook to improve for the neighborhood. Safety for the kids, we want to make sure crosswalks are there, streets are lit, sidewalks are in place, connectivity to our parks. They're going to enhance the development, the community that's existing around it is important overall, because this is a public project. We want to bring in people from the city, bring in people from the neighborhoods, make sure they have connectivity into our development. Thank you all.
Thank you, Red. So I think the last point we had was workforce housing. And when we started drafting this PUD, workforce housing was clearly going to be a key element, like it is with every PUD in the city. But what was really different about this one, when Robert Clement came and said, look, Rod, what we're thinking about doing here is something different. We want to do permanent workforce housing on Laurel Island. We don't want there to be a burn-off period. I had never heard of such a thing. And Robert explained it all to me. We drafted it in the PUD. We put a percentage there, and we got some feedback from Paul Johnson, who we heard from earlier tonight. And she was adamant the biggest problem the city faces, in addition to a shortage of workforce housing, is the fact that she's got workforce housing that's burning off. And we've got that issue with Bridgeview just right across the road, that at a certain point, the workforce housing that they have goes away. And so what we did on Laurel is we set a percentage aside, and it will be there permanently. We heard from you in July, increase a burn-off provision so that there will be some additional amount of workforce housing. But I think the key component here is that there is the first PUD, as you heard Ms. Shaw Johnson say, in the city of Charleston, where there is a requirement that workforce housing remain there permanently. So we're very proud of that, and we think that that's a PUD and will be beneficial to the city, not just in the near term, not just in 20 years or 30 years, but a permanent benefit to the city of Charleston and its workforce housing community. I think that hit the sort of 5 key takeaways that we had. I don't know if there are any other comments or questions that the board may have for us, and we can certainly try. It may not be me who answers it, but certainly someone here with the team that we can answer any questions, comments that you may have. Fine. Oh, all right. I'll say a few words.
Commissioners, thank y'all for giving this opportunity to speak with you. I do want to make it clear that we are in agreement with the items that Mr. Morgan listed at the beginning. Most of those were already things that we thought we had clearly agreed to, such as the amount of usable open space. That shouldn't have been up for debate for anybody, nor should the fact that we don't intend to have gates, etc. So we are open to y'all now asking us some more questions. If there's anything that anybody's confused about, we're more than happy to try to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clement. Good to hear from you. You've been on this property for a long time. I think what we'll do now is we'll close the public aspect of this, and if commission members do have questions that we need the applicant or the owners to answer, we'll come back to them. So we'll close the public aspect, and I'll ask commission members any questions, comments, motions. I'm going to start just by saying I do applaud the developers. I think the open space is wonderful. The workforce housing is superb, unique. I think there's a lot of wonderful things here. I do get concerned, and I mentioned that earlier about the, and I hear Mr. Bello, and they try to be very open. It's a very difficult time now with getting citizen input. But when I hear from a couple of neighborhoods that say they didn't know or didn't understand it, that's a concern of mine. But I'll let other commission members comment or ask questions.
Ms. Jacobs has her hand raised.
Ms. Jacobs?
I have a procedural question, if I may, before we really continue this, because we heard a lot of comments to ask us to deny defer, pause. And I have a certain reading of the ordinance, and I think we need to review this carefully before we make that kind of decision. And so I'm just going to state what I understand, and I think we need to review this before we move forward. If we defer this tonight based on what everybody said, just to get more input, it's my understanding this is a rezoning, and our ordinance only gives us 30 days from this public hearing to report back to City Council. So if we don't do something in 30 days, we just automatically send it as is to City Council. That's my understanding of the reading of the ordinance. I'm going through this for the public's benefit. If we just deny this tonight because we don't like it, then once again, we just turn it over to City Council. They now have a new voting to override our denial, and we don't get the benefit of any input. And so there's been so much request of us to pause, to deny, defer. I just think that we need to review that discussion to the public in all fairness before we proceed forward with, because I personally would like to proceed forward and put input in so that we can guide City Council on any recommendation that we as the commission that is charged with looking at this PUD prior to that. In addition, once it goes to City Council, it's my understanding it would get 3 readings, and most likely City Council, as they did with the Epic Center, would take time between each one of those readings to give more time for public input and tweaking of this PUD. If I'm incorrect in any of that information, I'd like for a staff member to correct me before we move forward. And I said all that for the benefit of the people who've submitted comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Christopher, if you can confirm, I think that Ms. Jacobs is correct in the procedure issue on that. Can you confirm that, please?
Yeah. I should add, I mean, there is a degree of appropriateness in far as what she's mentioning. I will add that your next scheduled meeting is September 16th. So were the commission to defer it, it would not be beyond 30 days from this public hearing.
Right.
So
I'm with you.
It's essentially.
Okay. Well, that again, we don't have any motions on the floor now, but that's good to understand that if there was a deferral, we would hear it again and have more input then. I'm not looking to rehear the thing, you believe. You'll misunderstand me, but that's good to know just to clarify and understand it. Other commission members? And I know you were correct as well, Ms. Jacobs, on the fact that City Council, if we sent the City Council in some form now, that they would, and the developers would have an opportunity to have more citizen participation, more input, all during that process as well. Other commission members? Can I get some comments, motions, a motion or comment or questions?
Mr. Bailey has his hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Appreciate your coming to my rescue.
I have a question, I guess, for both the applicants and for staff that has to do with the language in the PUD that essentially delegates the architectural review to the Property Owners Association. First of all, I think a PUD is absolutely appropriate for a development of this size that's going to take so long. I spent close to 8 years working for the Daniel Island Company, and kind of knowing what the roadmap was provided the flexibility that a developer needs to do things right. And so I agree with that directionally, but I am curious as to why it is apparently so important to completely remove from the city's public process the architectural review piece of this. I did see an editorial, I think it was an editorial in the Post-Courier, that said that there was a similar arrangement on Daniel Island. I know that not to be the case. That's incorrect. The commercial areas at least are subject to city review and a public process. Because I sat through a lot of those meetings during my time working out there. So I'd be curious as to why the developer thinks that is important to this project. I mean, if you could guarantee me that people like Eddie Bella were involved in it for the entire duration of the project, I'd feel more comfortable, but you can't. I mean, the history of this site suggests that we could be talking to a different group of people in 3 years. So anyhow, whoever wants to go first on that, I'd be interested to hear from staff and the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Morgan, the applicant, who would like to address that?
I'll start off with a quick comment on that, and that is the process that they are proposing in this PUD is very similar to what is the approval process for buildings and design in the Magnolia development that is, further up the peninsula on the Ashley River. I'm going to quote from Jacob Lindsay here, who is texting me as we're obviously our director. He says that the BAR is set up to review individual buildings in a historic context, not really appropriate for a location like this. And that's why they've chosen to have, we recommended that a design review system like they have proposed works better because the BAR gets to set up the design guidelines. And of course, then if they're individual property owners who don't agree with the internal design review board, the LIBAR, as it's quoted in the document, then they can appeal to the city's BAR itself. But city staff will be available and part of the review as well. And given that it's a process that we endorsed and approved for the Magnolia development, we were comfortable with it here.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Would anybody on the development team like to respond to Mr. Bailey's comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would, and thank you, Mr. Morgan. So the LIBAR that is set up for Laurel Island is a body that's going to hold public meetings. It's comprised of 3 members of the Property Owners Association and 2 members who are appointed by the City of Charleston. So it's not going to be 100% control by the Property Owners Association. There will be City of Charleston input with appointments. I'm assuming they'll be made just as perhaps it is to the Planning Commission, where the mayor and city council appoint 2 members who will take part in the process. The process will be publicly noticed. We actually followed the rules that the BAR and the DRB have as to public notice, as to meetings. The meetings will hold a similar format, so there will be an opportunity for the public to be engaged. And in the event that there's an appeal, that appeal would actually go to the BAR large. So we'll have the benefits, as Mr. Bailey pointed out, of having an island-wide perspective, as is and has been the case on Daniel Island. But then it will also have the backstop of an appeal to the BAR large in the event that, for whatever reason, an appellant believes that the design guidelines aren't being followed. And the design guidelines are something that the LIBAR will have to follow. Those design guidelines, just as in Magnolia, where they had guidelines that were prepared and were approved, here we'll have design guidelines after the approval of the PUD that will go before the BAR large and will be something that gets approved through a public process and will become the LIBAR's sort of working Bible, if you will, for approval of projects on Laurel Island.
Can I add one?
And Mr. Bello is going to add some comments as well.
Just going to add one thing, and thanks for that kind words, Mr. Bailey. I think, first of all, it was just to clarify one more time, it was incorrect. Someone said that it's a private review board. It's not. It's publicly advertised, just like the BAR. There will be public meetings. 2 of the members are appointed by the city. So I don't know where that came from, but that's clearly not right. The other thing is, I think it's important, I skipped over the architectural principles that will be coming, but those are going to be very specific to this type of development that Brian touched on. And I think if we want better design, first of all, it's going to be a bit of a challenge working on those principles, but hopefully they'll be something we're all happy with. But that board then will be very tuned in to those specific principles. If we were to take buildings here and have the BAR review them, then they're looking at a whole nother set of parameters. And so I think that was kind of the intent why we were, that was the idea behind its own review board. But again, it's fully public.
And the membership of it will reflect the membership of the large BAR. It will be made up of architects and land planners, et cetera. So the makeup is the same, the process is the same. It starts with the BAR approving the guidelines. It ends with an appeal back to the BAR if someone is dissatisfied. And it's completely open public set of hearings.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's go back to commission members. Other questions, comments?
Mr. Lassane has had his hand raised.
Yes, sir. Mr. Lassane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I want to just say once again, I commend the applicant here for the overall approach to the project, the open space in particular, and the public space more generally, the civic public realm, the street design. Street design, if we measured the amount of public space here, not open space necessarily, but public space would probably be the largest amount of public realm, and they've taken good care to give us good street design. And for me, the most important element was the affordable housing, and I appreciate their addressing of that. I think the 10% of permanent public housing is a great leap forward for the city of Charleston, and the example you're setting for the development community, I think, is exemplary, and we hope to see many developers follow your lead on this. So I very much appreciate the example you're setting. One thing that I would mention on the affordable housing that does gives you an opportunity to improve the plan even further. I guess I'll put it that way, and that is the time when the 10-year clock starts. A lot of people have mentioned how long this process has taken. We mentioned Magnolia just a few minutes ago, and we know how long that project has taken. And I do think that in good faith, having that 10-year clock on the portion that is a temporarily affordable, having that clock start at a time closer to when someone would actually be living there, I think is more in the spirit of what the community would be looking for. And I'm encouraged about meeting with the East Central neighborhood. That also gave me a little bit of concern, but knowing that you'll be meeting with them next week prior to this going to City Council, if the commission moves it forward tonight, I think that's a critical meeting, and I know you will listen to their comments and take those into account as it moves forward. So my one, it's a small point, but a not unimportant point about the start date for that affordability clock. But beyond that, that is my only real substantive comment. And subject to your answer, I will move for approval of the PUD document. Thank you.
Okay, there's a move for approval, and I agree with you. Mr. Hellman, did you want to respond to that? We're not going to usually go back and forth, but I think since Mr. Lassane asked something, if you want to respond to it, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you, Chairman Karras. Yes, that is something that we certainly can explore. I believe we can do is when that 10-year starts and how we can work that out so that it's not necessarily the date that the PUD is approved, but perhaps we can pick a point in time later so that it doesn't get eaten up through the next number of years of approval processes that we have to go through to get this accomplished.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And,
Mr. Hellman.
and Mr. Chairman, I might say that my motion also includes the conditions that the city suggested in addition to.
Yes, sir. So your motion is approved with all conditions as recommended by city staff earlier at the beginning of this presentation, correct?
That's correct.
Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
I
great.
thought you were asking us. Yes, sir, we're in agreement with those.
Okay. And y'all, the developers in agreement with those conditions? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. You know, all somebody has to do, Mr. Clement, is think about how long you've been on this project. If we get a picture of you when you started this, you were a young man then, I believe.
I'm not sure I was even married, and now I have 4 children, so it has been about that long.
You've grown up on this property, but there's a motion on the floor. Is there further discussion, questions, or a second by commission members?
Ms. Jacobs has her hand raised.
Who is that? I'm sorry.
Ms. Jacobs has her hands raised. Hand raised.
Hey, Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to reiterate what everybody has said about the work that's gone into this. There are lots of very grand things that are part of this PUD. I did take the time to read those 550 pages, and I am not a land use planner or a zoning person, so I did find some of the language confusing and would like to maybe go through in some details that might become conditions for our approval to make sure that the graphics that we've been shown and that the community has been shown, because I did attend those community meetings, reflect exactly the words, because sometimes when I read the words, they weren't quite what we saw. So
Let's go ahead and go through those, Ms. Jacobs.
If I may, I do agree with Harry about the time frame. That was one of my concerns. But I'm going to scroll away from seeing the whole screen, because buried in that workforce housing section, the way I read it, and if you'll give me just a second to find the page, something was very confusing to me. And I'm going to read the sentence. It says, households where occupants have in aggregate hold on, I got to get to where I can see it. In the aggregate, a household income less than or equal to 80% of the area median income for rental workforce housing units. It may just be me, but the way I read that is everybody from a 0 AMI to 80% qualify, which it's my understanding when you get down into the very low percentages, that's a different kind of workforce housing. Maybe I'm wrong in that reading of those lines there, but I think that might require some look. I think most of the times we're looking at workforce housing that's say between like maybe a 60% and 120% instead of 80% and less than. I might be wrong on that. Maybe somebody can address that, but I think that's a real important part to look at. I agree that we either do one of two things with the amortized housing, that we either change the time frame to 25 years to reflect the lag that will take to get to building housing, or we pick the time frame that Harry is suggesting. One of those two needs to happen there for that temporary housing. Right. In the section 3 of the land use, net density and calculation on page 11, you have a table which reflects the square footage. There's going to be retail and housing and a movie theater and stuff like that. And those are, I think, the ideal distribution that everybody's looking for. But we've had cases that have come back to us where they can't quite build out like that because market shifts over time and this development may go out for 30 or 40 years. I would like to see that table reflect a minimum so you do get that distribution within your community. You have your maximum that you want that everybody's seeing in the PUD, but like at least there will be some number there of retail and office and housing and movie theaters. So we don't get a lopsided development over time due to market shifts, which, you know, you need the flexibility to shift around and not be absolutely wedded to that table. But I do think we do need to have, at minimum, you would do something. And I think, and I'm not going to state what those numbers are, but I think there should be some discussion about that and should be a condition of approval. In the zoning criteria under parking standards, I started thinking about this. Y'all have greatly suggested, and all the wording about private and everything should come out of this document, and something should be stated about not being a gated community. But when you have a situation where there doesn't seem to be any parking, we're going to work toward resiliency. You're going to have public spaces, and I live in West Ashley, and I might not take a bus. I might take a car. So there needs to be some accommodation in the plan, so it doesn't look exclusionary by the fact that you don't have parking. Like, you can gate the community or you can prevent any parking in the community, but we need to think about how that's worded, because to me, I found that very exclusionary the way it was written. And the people on board now are all people that, you know, are very trustworthy, but, you know, we may find somebody 20 years down the road, has been mentioned. I think we fully addressed the outdoor space and buffers repeatedly. I just want to reiterate that we should just remove that minimum from the verbiage, because I think y'all used it as a comparison to show, and everybody read it as like, well, if nothing else, we'll do the minimum. And I think we should just remove the language and keep it at the proposed commitment that y'all said. With regard to your stormwater analysis, it's my understanding that it's a real technical challenge to build on this landfill, and our stormwater team has signed off on this, and a lot of the drainage will be accommodated by runoff. And this goes back to this green space dedication, because that green space can be used for resiliency and stormwater management on site, and I think that would go a long way in helping people understand that from y'all. And because there are things like, they call them water smart parks, where they hold water during storm events, and then they're used for, you know, public area when it's dry. And I think those sorts of things should be looked at. Those may come into your design criteria, but I think those need to be addressed. I do have the same concerns that Commissioner Bailey suggested about the architectural review. I think in minimum, and I think I heard a public comment say this, that we should at least have the guiding principles be just basic in the PUD. So we're leaving all those design principles outside of our approval tonight. That's not our area of expertise, that's in other people's hands, but I think we should at least give them some simple guiding principles about what needs to be seen. And you speak to things like resiliency, and I believe that design and resiliency of being allowed to use materials, you know, maybe there's always in design review board, like somebody doesn't like this kind of brick or that kind of brick. But if you're going to build a resilient community, you should be allowed to use resilient materials and be creative in things like rooftop gardens and stuff like that. Things that are quite different for our community. We shouldn't be necessarily restricted. We should be allowed to think in that realm for this PUD. As far as where the height districts are, I think that people have mentioned, and that those things could be shifted around later by the LIBAR. I think we should really consider codifying that as best we can. I'm open for some flexibility in that. So I don't have all the right wording for that, but I did forward a document to Christopher Morgan prior to the meeting with my thoughts about this. I would like to see some of these things become conditional in moving the PUD to the City Council so they can be thought about in further detail. And I would like to continue with the community engagement, because at each step of the process in City Council, for however long it takes, the public will be able to weigh in and this PUD will be complete. And I appreciate your time on this. I appreciate all the work y'all put into this. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs, and thank you for reading so much and analyzing this, because that's very important, and you certainly do your job, so we appreciate it. Chris, would you like to respond before we go to the applicant for any additional answers to some of the questions Ms. Jacobs brought up, or some of the wording technicalities?
Okay. So on the design review board, you know, our staff is very comfortable with this concept, because again, it's what was developed for Magnolia, and given the context of this site, you know, completely away from, you know, the historic buildings of our city's core, you know, we feel like things can be different than the BAR when you've got a historic building nearby, things like that. And we really feel strongly that the context of those design principles should be approved by the BAR, because they are the design experts that we have at the city. So we feel like that should be with the BAR and not in a PUD document, very strongly. I think, was there another, there was a question about the language as far as moving height districts around. And I would like, if Mr. Hellman maybe could comment on that, because that is not something that is typically done in PUDs, and I think there may be some folks misunderstanding the way some wording is in the LIBAR section.
And would you also want Mr. Hellman to maybe clarify that affordable terminology that Ms. Jacobs read, or you tell me some of the questions she had about the way it was worded?
We can do that. We can do that.
Okay.
A couple of things. Let's talk about the stormwater. First of all, we have been working with DHEC because it is a landfill. The property has to drain towards the Cooper River, and all the water will go that way, away from the neighborhoods behind us. And they don't want us retaining stormwater on the property. They want it in the river. They want it in the harbor. The reason is they don't want it going through the trash and getting contaminated. So that is how that's set up. There will be mechanisms to purify the water, clear the water before it hits the harbor. So that's part of our agreement, will be part of our agreement with DHEC. This is not an EPA site, it is a DHEC site, and that's why we'll be working with DHEC on that. The next one is the next one.
So I can start with this rental workforce housing unit, first point.
Yeah.
That was actually, that definition that I'm using in here for rental workforce housing unit was actually right out of the city's own zoning ordinance. There was a part about for sale workforce housing. There won't be any for sale workforce housing on Laurel Island. So that language actually is right out of the city's zoning ordinance, I think under the MU section, as it relates to defining the term for rental workforce housing unit of being somebody with 80% or less. And I agree with Ms. Jacobs that it could go below what would then be deemed workforce and go into like an affordable category. But that was we just used the city's definition as it now stands for workforce housing rental units.
Let me continue on. Sure. Ms. Jenkins, one of my other jobs in life is to be chair of the mayor's plural commission for homelessness and affordable housing. And that is how it is defined across the board. And that's how it works, whether we're dealing in Somerville, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, wherever. That's just how it reads. The big thing here in downtown Charleston, and on this site in particular, is you can imagine it's much more expensive to build on Laurel Island than it is, let's just pick, say, Citadel Mall, or another piece of property off of the peninsula. And so that's why this permanent workforce housing has been such a huge hurdle for us on the commission. So that's why we work so hard to make it a possibility. But it is brutally expensive. I think Mrs. Shaw Johnson talked about the numbers, but you know, a 200-unit project will cost $24 million just to build it. So that's how the numbers chime out. And of course, you would have to get 50% rent. So you've got to find a way to cover about $12 million for every 200 units.
Thank you, Rob. So this is the second point I think that was made about the 10-year period. We're certainly fine, Ms. Jacobs, with the language that Harriet was saying was proposing, and would be agreeable there. I think your third point was as to minimums. And I believe that the conditions that Mr. Morgan presented that staff had as the minimums would address, I think, the issue you're talking about, which is what happens if we really don't end up with a mix of uses. And the staff condition of approval that I think Mr. Lassane was incorporating in his motion spoke to when we reached a certain residential threshold, we also had to meet a certain commercial and office threshold as well. So I think that the conditions that, and Mr. Morgan, correct me if I'm misunderstanding those, but I think they're doing the same thing.
I would agree.
Then see, moving along, I think the next comment was as it relates to parking standards. And one of the difficulties that we have on Laurel Island is that we didn't want to come out of the box and say that each use requires X number of parking spaces, because then we fear that we may end up with, you know, Robert made a comment about Citadel Mall, that we end up with a Citadel Mall situation where we have a huge field of parking. So we feel that given that the nature of the development, that all of our streets that you'll see have on-street parking, that when you look at the design here, as Eddie's drawn this conceptual design, you'll see that there's parking that's conceptually going to be required or included with buildings as they get developed. Certainly one can't build an office building and not have sufficient parking. You won't get tenants. The same goes for retail or other uses. So I think one of the things that we're looking at here is how, as buildings get developed, the comment was that the LIBOR shouldn't have a say in that, but we believe that as it relates here, and incorporating what Mr. Bailey was saying, that the LIBOR should in fact have some say-so in how that parking works, and we think that addresses the parking standards comments. We certainly have no issue with number 5, taking out that language about minimum requirements, if that's creating some confusion. I think that also gets addressed with Mr. Morgan's last comment about the required 39.2 acres of open space short of act of God washing away Laurel Island. And I think that then leaves us with the last 2 comments, the water storage that Mr. Clement addressed, and then the LIBOR comments. We're not familiar with where the LIBOR would have the right to move height districts, but if there's any confusion about that, that needs to be stricken from wherever. We're happy to put language in here to say that the LIBOR does not have that right. It should not have that right. And I'm not familiar with the language, but if it's in there, we certainly want to remove it. And if it's not in there, we're happy to put language that says that the LIBOR does not have the authority to take height districts. And then as it relates to those principles, I think Mr. Morgan had spoken about that already.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hellman, Mr. Clement. Ms. Jacobs, I think the, and Mr. Morgan, between the applicant and Mr. Morgan, I think they addressed, I hope they did, I think they addressed the questions you had. Is that correct?
I believe all my questions were addressed, and I believe that they, some of the things, the way the wording was for the staff condition is another way of putting the things that I was addressing. But like I said, we still have, you know, counsel in case anybody finds a tweak. So right. I'm good with a second. I'm good with a second to Harry's motion. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So there's a motion by Mr. Lassane that includes all conditions, everything mentioned, everything agreed upon by the developers, which they have agreed upon, and seconded by Ms. Jacobs. Is there any other questions or comments by commission members? If not, we'll go to a vote. And we'll go to a vote on this item. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Bailey?
But I in favor.
I don't know if Dr. Irons is with us or not. I don't know if he was able to join us. I hadn't seen him. Ms. Jacobs?
I in favor.
Ms. Johnson?
Aye, in favor.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Lampasas? Sunday with us?
Are you muted?
I'm sorry, I didn't mute it. I in favor, Charlie, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Lampasas. Mr. Lassane?
Aye, in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Flug?
Aye, in favor.
Great. And I'm in favor as well. So that would be 7 in favor and none against. I think that concludes our agenda. So, Mr. Morgan, I think that, and thank you for the applicants. And I think the main thing we heard, and I appreciate your saying, that they'll be continued, and Mr. King had said it earlier from the Preservation Society, that the public is still involved in this process going forward as well. So we appreciate that. I think that concludes the agenda, correct, Mr. Morgan?
Yes, it does.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight, and always. Is a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
both.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Y'all have a good evening. Thank you.